Hello everyone, Zeno What If here. Those that are new to the channel, subscribe to see some of the content I made. Leave a comment down below for any ideas. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Link down in the description of the fanfiction of this, What If. To bring in part 16 of What If the Gate appeared in G.I. Joe. Chapter 30, Aftermath, Diabo's Choice. Many buildings had either been damaged or destroyed by the violent shaking, and as a result, there were many still who were in need of assistance, needed be in the form of food or even shelter. Even those who lived in the upper districts of the capital, areas that had survived the shaking mostly intact, the noble families that called home for centuries, were too afraid to return to their homes after the shaking came to an end and demanded that they be given places to stay until they were certain their luxurious mansions were safe to re-enter. As a result of this chaos, the Satyran garrisons and members of Pina's Marigold Knights did what they could to assist the distressed population. But with so many members of Sidera's protective force busy with relief efforts in and around the Imperial City, there were now many of Sidera's important buildings and palaces that now had weakened defenses and security. Normally, this would not be an issue for many in the noble houses, and even with the current war going on, the general consensus among the population was that the enemy from beyond the gate was still too far away to pose a serious threat. But neither of them even knew just how wrong they were. It was a moonless night over the imperial capital, as a lone MQ-9 Reaper flew quietly above the imperial capital. Its small profile and high altitude making it next to impossible for anyone on the ground to know it was even there. Flying nearly 5 miles above the surface of Sidera, some 12,000 feet above where a human pilot would require oxygen, Lil Rory orbited the city, awaiting instructions from its handlers, who were monitoring the flight from a warehouse in Akusho. The MQ-9 Reaper drone with an Apostle-approved drawing of Rory Mercury, herself, sitting with a smirk atop the head of a dead dragon painted on its side, was cruising far above the visual limits of ground-based lookouts as Captain Willis and Lieutenant Jansen awaited word to commence their attack runs. On board the unmanned aircraft, the turret-mounted camera system swiveled to life and switched to infrared. As it zoomed in on a somewhat massive palace and transmitted what it saw back to Fort Ginza. At said fort, General Hazama and the rest of the ANF commanders had gathered in the base command and control center and watched the black and white images being shown on the large video monitors. All the while the CNC staff began to relay information among themselves and the base commanders. This was probably going to be one of the more important missions the Allied nations' forces had undertaken in months, and failure was not an option. Suddenly, the very familiar shapes of helicopters came into view on the monitors, signaling that Operation White Knight had begun. The 6 Mega Henrys -6 inches Little Bird helicopters flew close to the ground and in formation, as they approached the residence of a one Crown Prince Zorzel. An individual who had single-handedly managed to place any peace talks between the warring faction in jeopardy by his own actions. His confession that he was holding a number of Ginza hostages in his personal palace had not gone over well with the ANF member nations. As a result, a plan was hatched to rescue those who were being held. This was going to be a joint operation between a number of ANF partners. U.S. Delta Force and Japanese SFG would raid the prince's palace itself, after being airlifted in by the Night Stalkers. They would be joined by Filipino Scout Rangers, Centurion's team, Shadow Warriors, and Ghost Recon Team, Hunter, who had been monitoring the palace grounds for weeks by this point and would act as backup in case things got serious. Thus would be a 3-tier plan of attack. 1. The Scout Rangers would secure the main garden and eliminate any and all Imperial soldiers they found on the palace grounds, thus providing both a safe landing zone for the Chinooks and extra security for the units inside the palace. 2. Once inside, the Delta Force and Hunter would secure the upper levels of said palace and secure any and all important documents they found, as well as neutralize any resistance they encountered. 3. The Japanese SFG with Shadow Warriors and Taiul would locate the cells in which the slaves were being held. Taiul was all too familiar with the build's layout and would lead the G.I. Joes and Japanese to their objective. Once the hostages were located, they would be led back to the surface and airlifted out by the 3 Chinook helicopters currently on the ground at Baton Station. The slaves would first be taken to Camp Formal in Italica for medical treatment, before finally returning to Fort Ginza itself. If things got serious and the Imperial garrisons were to launch a counter-attack, support would come from Snake Eater, which would be orbiting the palace during the operation. As well a number of amphibious vehicles that had originally taken part in the demonstration for the Imperial senators, just days ago. They would be the Plan B, just in case extraction by helicopter was impossible. The ANF commanders were not leaving anything to chance. Soon, the little birds broke off into groups as they flew over the palace and began to hover above the marble and stone structure. Moments later, ropes dropped from each aircraft and the Special Forces operators fast roped to the building below. No sooner had the teams made it onto the building, the helicopters flew off to a secondary location to await further orders. Leaving the Delta Force Team Bravo and SFG to enter the building via the many windows and balconies that existed. At the same time, 2 other teams entered the building by front and back doors, joining other teams. Nightmare 1 to Oni 1 have entered Palace. Do you copy, Captain? SKP Lang radioed his Japanese counterpart, as his Delta Force team made their way down the darkened Palace hallway. Oni 1 to Nightmare Lead have breached Palace and making way to objective. White Queen in leading the way, the Japanese SFG commander replied, as his team followed Taiul. Copy that. Conducting sweep of upper levels. Nightmare Lead out. Skip finished his transmission, leaving the SFG leader to focus on his objective. With their M4 Sopmod and MRB rifles drawn and pointed into the darkness, Skip and his men made their way through the palace corridors. Night vision and cross-comm goggles bathing everything in an eerie green glow, as the Delta Force and Ghost searched every single room they came across. If it looked important, the operatives grabbed it and placed it in a bag for transport back to Ginza. At one point, the teams came across a pair of Imperial soldiers stumbling around in the darkness. But they were quickly dispatched with a burst of suppressed gunfire from the Delta Force and Ghost's weapons. Eventually, Skip and his men came upon what they believed to be the prince's main bedroom. The rather large and ornate wooden doors may have tipped them off to that fact, as well as the oversized and equally ornate bed in the center of the room. Well, someone is overcompensating for something, one of the ghosts muttered, causing some of his teammates to chuckle. Cut the chatter and start searching, ordered Ferguson, as his team and Skip's team began to search the room's stuff. Cap, you better take a look at this, Sparks called out, as he stood in front what looked like a dressing table. What did you found? Skip asked his comrade, as he walked up to where he was standing. Without saying a word, Sparks turned around to reveal a small yet ornate box he held in his hands. But what really had the man shaken up, was the fact that the box itself had numerous locks of hair within it. Holy shit, muttered Ferguson. WTF is this shit? Snarled Skip in disgust, his face was twisting under his balaclava mask. If I had to guess, sir, replied Sparks, I think this might be his trophies. Jesus fucking Christ, muttered Kozik, I've heard of a maniac princess, but this is ridiculous. Bag and tag it, spat Skip quickly. I want to GE the hell out of this shithole, as soon as possible. Tell me about it, snorted Ferguson, we've been here for a few minutes, and I'm already getting sick of it. This guy is really giving all pedophiles and rapists a very bad name. Unlike her companions, Taiul had little need for their night vision goggles. As the bunny warrior led the otherworlder soldiers through the corridors of her former prison. The queen had many memories of this place, all of which were not exactly pleasant. But the former queen was able to fight back those awful memories and focus on the mission at hand. Taiul had to admit though, that their otherworlders were quite an efficient bunch. As they were able to organize a raid on the Crown Prince's palace in such a short period of time. Then again, she was assisting these Japan SA and Amir Khans in their mission, and from what they had told the warrior, her knowledge of said palace was indeed quite helpful to them. But what really surprised the Battle Queen, was the fact the ANF commander agreed to her assistance in rescuing other slaves, when it came to Prince Zorzel himself. Centurion never said it directly, but whatever plans his commanders and leaders had for the empire after the war, it did not include Zorzel becoming emperor. Then again, anyone with a brain could see, that he was not exactly fit to lead a nation, and Taiul was certain that the ANF could care less if that monster lived or died. Coming upon the door that led down to the prince's dungeon, 2 of the shadow warriors took point and slowly opened the entrance. Which revealed a flight of stairs that lead down into the darkness. They are down there, Tyul explained, as she took back her position in the lead. Zorzel liked to keep us in down here. He said it was to remind of just where our place was when compared to him. Sounds like a real Prince Charming, snorted Haruka. Come on, let's find those girls, fast. Centurion motioned his team to advance down the stone stairs. Tyul lead the way, as she drew her Mk3 combat knife that had been given to her by one of the Shadow Warriors. It was much smaller than what she was used to carrying, but the warrior bunny guessed it would have to do for now. The air was cold and pungent with the scent of stale, earthy air, suggesting that they were now below ground surface, as Tyul's ears twitched every so often as she scanned for any sounds. Suddenly, the bunny woman shot forward at an incredible speed and towards the bottom, following by Centurion, who also runned at fast speed. Not knowing what to make of the situation, the SFG team and Shadow Warriors followed them with their weapons at the ready. Then, a female scream filled the air, followed by the sounds of metal slicing through flesh and Med crying out in pain. Just as the SFG made it to the bottom of the stairway, they saw several dead Imperial soldiers on the stone floor with some rather horrific wound about their bodies. Moments later, another horrific scream filled the air, and when the SFG soldiers looked in the direction of the sound, they saw another Imperial soldier stagger out of one of the cells. He had a look of absolute horror on his weathered face, as he clenched his bleeding throat before collapsing on the floor dead. No sooner had he done so, a blood-covered Tyul and Centurion came out of the cell with Tyul's combat knife and Centurion's own knife still in their hands. Quickly, get inside, barked Centurion, we've almost lucky to save them. What happened, Soshiraken, Supreme Commander, said Haruka. You need to get your people out of here now, answered Tyul sternly. These sons of whores were about to kill them. Still rather shocked by the scene, the Japanese and Shadow Warriors made their way into the cell, and what they saw both shocked and angered the officers. Get them out of here, barked Colonel Fury, before reaching for his radio and contacting the second team. This is Shadow 2, calling Nightmare 1, we have located the hostages and are bringing them to the surface. Contact Baton and have our birds pick us up. The swag lead calling White Knight, the new voice called over the comm system. Be advised, Snake Eater is detecting a large convoy of enemy troops are moving toward the palace. I repeat, large enemy forces moving towards the palace. Sounds like Zorzel is coming back, said Centurion, come on, get those people up there, fast. As this was going on, a heavily bandaged and bruised Prince Zorzel sat within the confines of the horse-drawn carriage and silently brooded. Such had been his mood ever since he was savagely beaten by that demon disguised as a otherworlder soldier. His face was still heavily bruised and his left eye has been swollen shut, as his bandages were stained with his own blood from the many cuts he had received. To say Zorzel had been absolutely humiliated by the assault would be an understatement. He was boiling mad. How dare these barbarians come in his father's home and make demands? How dare they soil him with their filth? Him, the son of the Emperor and the destroyer of the warrior bunny clans. The crown prince of the Sateran Empire and soon to be the greatest emperor Sedera had ever seen. They had committed a great sin by resting their hands on his divine body, and all because of that whore who warned him about the earth shakes. Why was she so special anyway? She was just another one of his many trophies. Even more so, why did they feel the need to risk their lives for some insignificant slut like her? Exclamation mark. And to add insult to injury, these other worlders had even taken his most prized possession. They've stolen Tyul from him. That bitch will pay for her betrayal. As well as those other worlders, once he had healed. He would personally lead the Imperial army against the other worlders and crush them under his might. He would drive them back through the gate, to their own world, and destroy their kingdoms one by one. He would kill all the men and enslave all the women. He would make the other worlders regret ever crossing paths with Crown Prince Zorzel. But before the bruised prince could continue with his destructive fantasy revolving around revenge, a loud chopping sound began to fill the air, and it only got louder and louder as seconds passed. What's going on? The Crown Prince groaned through his pain, as his men began to feel an uneasy sense of dread. Some of the horse began to panic at the sounds, and their riders desperately tried to calm down the beasts, but the noise just got louder and louder as if it were right on top of them. Suddenly, the three Chinooks belonging to Task Force Night roared low overhead as they took off from Zorzel's palace. On board Reach 1 were a number of hostages that had been taken from Ginza and were being used by the prince as his personal sex slaves. Many of whom showed signs of malnutrition and extreme abuse, yet they were the lucky one as they would be going home soon. There were still those who never left Zorzel's palace, their last days spent filled with pain and were subjected to unspeakable horrors by the prince and his many friends. Friends who would soon receive a visit from one of the Special Forces teams currently in Sidera. But 90 souls had been rescued with the aid of Tayul and Centurion, and the ANF would be sure to trust her in the future. No sooner had the Chinooks passed, all 6 of the little birds with their cargo of Special Forces teams screamed off into the night and back to their base. But the operation was not yet over. With the hostages secured and on their way to safety, the ANF leaders would have been quite content with the successful rescue of their people. But after seeing the conditions in which they were kept via the cross-com cameras the Special Forces soldiers wore, it was obvious that Crown Prince Zorzel needed to be reminded of just who was really in control of Falmart. Shadow 1 to Little Rory, said Centurion through his headset, commence Lancaster. Repeat, commence Lancaster. Shadow 1, this is Little Rory, answered MQ-9 Reaper pilot, we copy, commencing the attack run. At the command, the operators banked their craft slightly to the east, towards the Imperial Senate building. This was their primary target. The strike on the Senate had to be carried out first if for any reason, the mission were interrupted or had to be aborted, the message to the Imperial Senate had to be delivered. To make the Allies' meaning perfectly clear, 2 500-pound GBU-12 paveway bombs had been selected. These laser-guided weapons carried the warhead from the Mark 82 Mod 7 fragmentation bomb. There was no need for an explosive charge, the spray of shrapnel across the forum would be more than sufficient without risking destroying the entire building or possibly starting an uncontrollable fire. Of course, there was more at stake than altruism. An out-of-control fire could be blamed on 1,000 unrelated causes. This message had to be unmistakable. These bombs were designed to penetrate bunkers and lightly armored vehicles and would make a clear demonstration that the Allies could wipe out the entire Senate in a heartbeat if they chose. Lil Rory descended gradually as Willis and Jansen lined up their attack run. Course steady. Targeting laser locked. Bombs armed and ready. Launch. Bombs away. The technicians watched as the onboard low-light camera tracked the bombs for 38 seconds until they impacted, slicing through the dome of the Senate, both impacting within 10 feet of the center of the forum. The fragmentation warheads detonated, throwing hot shrapnel across the forum. The building itself would be habitable and repairable, but the reminders of this night would long linger. But this was only half of the night's deliveries. The second was intended as a much more personal slap against His Imperial Highness, Prince Zorzel. Here was a man who seemed personally inclined to war, provided that he was safe from harm. Tonight, the Allied nations' governments wanted to drive home the point that he was far from untouchable. In the files that ANF intelligence had assembled from interviews with detainees and prisoners as well as agents and direct observations, it was noted that after his successful campaign against the warrior bunnies, Zorzel had commissioned 2 very impressive statues of himself mounted on horseback and wearing a conqueror's laurels. Tonight, Zorzel was going to lose his heads. For this, 1 R9X missile had been allotted for each statue. The R9X was a special non-explosive missile designed in environments where a desired target was precipitously close to innocence. Dubbed the Flying Ginsu, the R9X was equipped with 6 metal blades designed to spring out and lock into position just before impact, creating a kinetic kill weapon whose area of effect could be limited to the length of its blades. With the successful strike on the forum completed, Lil Rory turned towards Prince Zorzel's palace and the operators prepared for the first of 2 attack runs. Left or right? Take the right one first. Roger that. First right and the other will be left. Not for long. Descending into R run. Stand by for targeting lock. Locking on now. Launch 3. 3's away. On target. After 16 seconds, the missile, plunging downward, struck its target. The head of the statue was shattered into tiny pieces. What? Gasped Zorzel in shock, as he saw his own pride been blown to bits. Now the other one. Roger that. Gee, what a way to lose one's head. You say that with a mouth full. Alright, here we go. One last time. Target acquired. Launch 4. 4's away. Whoops. Looks like we were a little off. Did we miss? Nah. Still a clean decapitation, I think. One more pass for verification. I'm on it. Yup, the heads are rolling tonight. The video showed that while the aim was just the slightest bit behind, causing the missile to shatter most of the statue like a divine hammer, one of the blades had clipped the statue's head, severing it cleanly. Nice work, little Rory, said Centurion, watching with satisfaction the result of the attack. Now, return to base, the Snake Eater is about to give the final touch to Prince Shithead's home. Roger that, sir. She came, she saw, and she reaped. Lil Rory, returning to base. And with that, the MQ-9 Reaper went on his returning course back to base. Snake Eater, this is Shadow 1, said Centurion, commence hammering. Roger that, Shadow 1. Hammer down, danger close. The AC-130J-30 pilot radioed to Centurion, just moment before an 105mm shell slammed into the marble structure. A massive explosion following the violent impact, just as several 40mm Bofors rounds and a string of 22mm rotary cannon fire followed up the initial assault. This was a process that was repeated for the next 10 minutes, as Snake Eater continued its attack on the Crown Prince's home. What took many years and thousands of slaves many years to build, the Spectre II gunship only took minutes to destroy. The high explosive rounds making short work of the massive stone and marble structure, as flames began to engulf whatever flammable materials existed in the now shattered structure. It was only at this point did Zorzel and his entourage arrived at his now destroyed home. The Crown Prince could only look on helplessly in horror, as his magnificent home was destroyed by fire and damnation that fell from the sky. Just what kind of magic was this? Zorzel knew that the other worlders were responsible for the destruction of his home, but just how in the name of Hardy were they doing it? Exclamation mark. But after what felt like an eternity, Snake Eater finally expended its ammunition and began its long flight back to Alnus Airfield, leaving what had been one of Sidera's most beautiful homes in ruins, as it slowly consumed itself in flames. But yet on one of the few walls that remained standing, a message was sprayed painted on by the retreating Shadow Warriors. Nemo mi impune lacacet. No one attacks me with impunity. It had been hours since the earthquake, and Tyrell was still trying to make sense of all that had happened. The one-time queen of the warrior bunnies and until today, slave of the Imperial Prince was astounded by the vehicles used by Noriko's people. Especially the helicopter that carried her and sweet Noriko to Alnus. Well, astounded might not be the right word as Tyrell's mind was simply overwhelmed. The noise from the engines was horrible as she folded her ears and pressed her head into Noriko's lap. She spent the entire flight like that trying to close out the chaos of alien sounds around here. The only sensation that Tyrell allowed herself to feel was the calming touch of Noriko holding her, while inside she pulled away to a world of her thoughts. Of course, it was right that Noriko be freed and Tyrell admitted that if Noriko had left her there, Tyrell would have surely felt a betrayal worse than Zorzel's lies and nearly as bad as her own people's hatred. Tyrell was terrified of the madness that still called to her. It was a demon that wanted to consume her in hate and she had been so near to being its slave even more than Zorzel's. But somehow, her sweet, beloved Noriko had saved her. At least for now. But sitting next to her beautiful flower, Tyrell wanted none of the hate, none of revenge tainting the warm feeling of her deliverance. Zorzel had lied to her, so of course, he lied to her people. And the events in the throne room had shown quite clearly that Zorzel was determined to seek the most self-destructive path possible. Boros would still try to manipulate that to his own ends, but, inevitably, Zorzel would destroy everything he touched. So it was not even necessary for Tyrell to be there to guide him. The only question was whether he would destroy himself alone or take the Empire with him. Tyrell realized she didn't care if the Empire lived or died. Whether Zorzel was the Empire or an aberration, the Empire would either follow him down in flames or it would deny him as surely as her own people denied her. Either would be fitting and was no longer her problem. Eventually, they arrived at Alnus. It was a few hours, but Tyrell honestly couldn't say whether it was hours, minutes, or eternity. She turned to Noriko as the helicopter settled over its landing pad and the noise of the engine ceased and gave her a small smile. It was a frightening new world, but Tyrell would not be afraid of tomorrow, for her flower would be there to guide her. No sooner had the 3-vehicle convoy arrived at the base hospital, the 2 ambulances were descended upon by almost a dozen medical personnel and nurses. Their passengers for that night were quickly removed from the Humvees, M997A variant, and rushed into the building itself. For Noriko, it was as if her prayers had been finally answered after so many months of captivity. The moment she and her boyfriend were taken through the gate, the young high school student thought she would never see her family or loved ones again. Life from that moment on was to be nothing more than a sex slave for quite possible the most sadistic creatures she had the unfortunate pleasure of. Her nights were spent hearing the painful cries come from other women who Zorzel had taken for that evening. When they finally returned, if they returned, their bodies would be covered with bruises and other horrific marks. But she would soon realize that these women, some even younger than herself, were the lucky one. Some of the women who were used by the prince had their minds broken after months of constant R*pays and other unspeakable acts. Eventually she herself would be forced upon by the sinful prince, no matter how hard she begged for him to stop. Almost every other night she would be made to service Zorzel, and in the morning her young body would have more bruises to show that she had indeed spent another night with the crown prince. Yet in that hellish situation, the young woman did find a friend in a bunny girl named Tayul, who would take care of her after her time with the prince. Tayul never talked about her past and Noriko never dared to ask, but she soon found herself being protected by this woman with rabbit ears, and eventually, a friendship formed between the two. Tayul showed her more compassion than anyone else had during her time as a slave, as the older woman helped heal her wounds and would even tell her stories about a brave warrior bunny who was at one time beloved by her people, but was soon made to look like a traitor by her enemies. Noriko was not sure, but she was certain that Tayul May had been talking about herself in those stories. But she never dared to ask if they were. Now both herself and her friend were free from the grasp of that monster Zorzel and, at least in her case, would be going home to her family soon. But while she was happy, Noriko wondered if Tayul had any family before being captured by the prince. Tayul never really talked about her life, and it was clear that it would only bring back painful memories for her anytime she asked. Hopefully Tayul would be able to build a new life and finally be able to let go of her painful past. Obviously this would not happen overnight, but maybe in time the two women would be able to help each other deal with the trauma together. One could only hope after all. But as the duo were taken in for examination, their presence was noticed by a certain demi-human who just happened to there at the time. Emroy may have been the god of war, death, violence and all that fun stuff, but Rory herself had been alive long enough to know just how much lending an ear could help people even in their darkest hour. She had just finished speaking with a nice elderly couple who had been brought in for chest pains, when her eyes caught sight of the procession taking place. It was also in that moment Rory saw an individual she had not seen in a long time, being carted into one of the room. An uncharacteristic shiver suddenly went up the demi-goddess' spine, as she knew just what the implications would be if the other bunny warriors found out that their former queen was here in the Otherworlder base. Rory knew of the tragic recent history of warrior bunny clans and even more so, the betrayal of their queen. Rory knew she needed to warn the Otherworlder commanders at once, or there would be an absolute bloodbath once someone let it slip that former battle queen Tayul was in the fortress. Without a second thought, the Apostle of Emroy ran out of the base hospital as fast as she could. She needed to warn the Otherworlders of just who they had in their company. Emperor Molt sat at his personal quarters in his deep thought. Zorzel was now been taken to his father's palace and putted into one of the rooms. Next to Molt, his youngest child, Pina stood projecting an admirable calm as she continued to deal with messengers and pass instructions. Through her, the Empire was beginning to react to the disaster that had struck. More specifically, the disaster that the public was aware of. But for in Molt's own throne room, another had unfolded before him. He could now see that his plan to drag out talks with the ANF was as dead as the Imperial soldiers cut down by the foreigners, weapons before his eyes. He could see it in Centurion's eyes and hear it in his words that so directly antagonized, they had no incentive to allow matters to quietly drag on. Pina had understood this. Once again, Molt has faced the folly of his own choices. That Otherworlder's commander Centurion Prime was right. Zorzel was not capable of running the Empire without guidance, and one thing the night's events had taught him, was an awareness of his own mortality. If Molt were to die, leaving the Empire in Zorzel's hands, it would be a disaster and one that Molt had very deliberately shaped. But Pina was different. Naive, too trusting perhaps, but strong and adaptable. Even now, with the dismay she certainly had to feel, she remained here, doing her duty to bring order amid the chaos. Except, Molt admitted with a touch of shame, it was not Pina's duty. It was his. As more of the guard reported in and the various generals and ministers began to report in, Molt turned to his daughter and favored her with a smile. You have done well this night, Pina, but it is time for you to see to your own. Do not worry. General Maxius is setting up his command tent outside as we speak. I will move there once that is complete, I promise. He then silenced for a moment, then continued in much serious tone, but your brother has left us with a problem. I will work on this matter and trust you to work on repairing the harm he has caused. They trust you, and after this night, I would trust no other to handle this. I must place a heavy burden upon you, but you have shown me that you are fully capable of bearing it. He lowered his head and sighed, speaking very quietly. It's painful to admit it, Pina, but I can't hide the facts anymore. We're defeated, Pina, the war is practically over. But this is something that our people, or indeed, many in positions of power, are not ready to hear yet. At least not in such a direct manner. If we tell this right now, there'll be a great disaster, as many nobles would rise against us, as well against each other. Our empire cannot afford a civil war, Pina, which we must avoid it at all cost. It is up to you now, Pina. Be careful and be clever, my daughter. You must fix the errors I have made. Pina acknowledged her father's dismissal and withdrew. Champagne, a very promising knight of the Red Rose, waited with a fresh horse for her highness. Together, the two rode back to the Jade Palace, where Pina was relieved that Mr. Sugawara and Russell had not simply left. She approached them with some trepidation. Ambassadors, again, please believe me. I had no knowledge that my own brother was holding your people. As we said, Sugawara told her, we do not hold you personally responsible. We do, however, have every intention of getting our people back, through whatever means are necessary. Pina nodded. If you could supply me with a list of just who I might be looking for. Anything might help. Pina respected and liked Centurion and even considered him as a friend, despite that she had just watched his people kill 20 Saturans in order to retrieve several other world citizens. While it was true that it would never have come to that had Zorzel not forced the outcome, it still underscored that Centurion and his forces would be utterly ruthless in their efforts to recover their people, and if it was necessary for them to kill 20 Saturans for each of their people, then they would do so without hesitation. If they had to kill 100, they would do so, and if they had to level Sedera, they would do so. Sugawara nodded. That is not an unreasonable request. We will see that it is as complete a listing as we can. Pina nodded, then after careful consideration decided to reveal what her people had managed to accomplish to date on that matter. While it was not how she intended to reveal her efforts, she felt that a failure to fully disclose her efforts would, at some point, cause a dangerous misunderstanding. In the interest of full disclosure, 2 of my knights have successfully located 47 people from your world, mostly women. They are recovering at a private villa. I had hoped to disclose this once official talks began. My knights, Flavius and Diet, are still searching for others. I see, Sugawara considered. Pina's strategy made some sense, but now, Japan and her allies would have to respond. We will want to arrange for their repatriation as soon as possible. Of course, Pina replied. If I may. What will your people do now? We have a number of options, Your Highness, Ambassador Russell remarked, joining the conversation. Our governments will want to send a clear message to your people. We, of course, are not at liberty to disclose exactly what form our response will take. Of course, Pina replied solemnly. However, Russell continued, we have no desire to either harm innocent lives if it can be avoided, and we have no desire to abandon the dialogue we have begun. You have my personal gratitude, Pina told them. And you have ours, Your Highness, Sugawara told her. Hopefully, there will be no other surprises on our path to peace. Zorzel sat on his bed in his father's palace, staring out his window at the capital. Part of him almost seemed to gather cruel satisfaction as he noted the fires burning. He hated them. He hated all those worthless little nothings. He hated them for all the adoration they gave his father. Father, Zorzel snorted in contempt at the word. What father allows his enemy to assail his son and heir like this? Zorzel knew Molt was many things, Calculating, occasionally cold, but never before had Zorzel thought the emperor was a coward. Yes, only a coward would stay silent while barbarians beat his son. Zorzel continued to brood as the healer finished ministering to the sullen prince, curtly dismissing the man when he was finished. Virtually no one, even those among his closest associates, dared approach him until Boro, his tool and spy, entered with head lowered in a suitably and appropriately submissive posture. Your Highness, I have just heard what has happened. Not only is the assault on your person a shocking crime but compounded with Tayul's betrayal. Zorzel actually looked curious at that. Betrayal? He asked, what do you mean, Boro? I suppose it should have been expected of a mere slave, but I do not think betrayal is too strong a word. After all, have you not been a generous master? And should not a slave love her master? If Tayul had truly been loyal, then why did she not fight to stay with her master, who has loved her with such great kindness? The prince had not considered that. Boro was correct. He had been very generous to Tayul and that rabbit bitch had betrayed him. It made him all the angrier. You're right, he said, she did betrayed me. All for that bitch Noriko. I want them both dealt with. Yes, your highness. Anyway, is that all you want to tell me, Boro? Boro then grinned. Truly, losing Tayul had been an irritation to Boro's plans, but Tayul had always been expendable anyway. The loss merely forced him to accelerate other plans. I thought that since his highness had lost a companion, he would love to meet a real woman, who will be more than happy to serve him more faithfully than Tayul. Interesting, said Zorzel. Who is this woman, Boro? She is a lady, born of the noble imperial blood, who has been very interested in meeting and serving his highness were it his desire. Zorzel had to admit that he was intrigued. Well then, show me this woman, Boro, and if she is what you promising me, I'll more than satisfied. Boro grinned even wider. Raising his voice, he gestured to the door. I present to thee, your highness, Lady Cassiopeia. Zorzel looked to see a tastefully dressed young woman enter his chambers. Odd that she was clearly vulpine. Cassiopeia, Zorzel rolled the name thoughtfully. I was told you are of noble blood. Curious. My father is a senator, your highness. However, it appears I am an inconvenience. A shame to the family. But is the shame mine or his, my prince? She dared. That I should suffer for his weaknesses. Expertly, she twisted the knife in Zorzel's wounds as she struck a chord in him. It's like a betrayal, isn't it, Cassiopeia? Yes, your highness. Blood betrayals cut the deepest. I would give my undying devotion if he would simply acknowledge me as his. Perhaps such devotion is more than such a man deserves, Cassiopeia, replied Zorzel. Then he smiled as he saw something in her eyes. Something beyond mere agreement to understanding. That is the name my mother gave me. It is yours to command me with if you wish, my prince. Is there another name you would go by? He asked. For those who do not deserve my given name, I call myself, Vendetta. She dared a hateful smirk. Zorzel smiled again, despite the pain. Vendetta. It is a name that promises deeds, my dear. Indeed, my prince. Tell me then, Vendetta, what is to be done with those who would betray your prince? The price of betrayal is death, my prince. Excellent, grinned Zorzel, feeling despite the pain, that Cassiopeia's words are almost like oil to his wounds. You're speaking the same language as I am, my dear. I pledge my eternal allegiance to serve you and you only, my prince. You may employ me as you will, your highness. Ah, such words are like healing bath to my wounds, sighed happily Zorzel. I trust, you're quite satisfied, your highness, asked Boro. Yes, you've done well, answered Zorzel. Now, leave us. We'll talk about Tayul's punishment later. As you command, your highness, answered Boro, then left. Zorzel grinned, and though his body hurt in terrible ways, he pulled Vendetta to himself. Serve me well, he said, serve me and me alone, and I will give you vengeance upon those that have wronged you and forced you to hide. Serve only me and I may grant you the world itself. But disobey me, and I shall personally punish you by death. Your wish is my command, my prince. The sun was just now starting to peek over the horizon, as Tayul laid in her hospital bed. Despite the previous night's events, the former battle queen was unable to sleep and had remained awake ever since her arrival to the hospital. It surprised the bunny woman just how much the other worlder healers knew about her people's anatomy, a possible result of these people learning from the few bunny warrior healers who had managed to escape the Imperial Army. But as she laid there in her darkened room, the former queen could not help but to feel that her being in this fortress had caused some kind of stir. Her body may had been weakened after years of abuse, but Tyul's senses were still able to pick up things a normal human could not. She could hear murmurs of doctors and staff outside her room, while her eyes would see a number of other worlder soldiers anytime they looked out her window. She may not have been able to understand their language, but Tyul knew deep down that these people were indeed talking about her. Did they see her as a threat? Did they know just who she was? Even more so, were those soldiers there to keep her in, or to keep her own people out? Either way, Tyul was too weak to try to escape, and even if she wanted to, just where would someone like her go? Besides, she already made a promise to herself that if any of her people came to kill, the former queen would not even try to fight back. After all the pain she had caused, it was the least she deserved. Suddenly, the door to her room opened to reveal an individual she was not expecting to see at this point. Then again, how her day had been going, Tyul should not have expected anything less. "Your Majesty," Rory said with a slight bow, before entering Tyul's room. "Rory Mercury," the bunny woman addressed the demi-goddess. "Somehow I am not surprised that you of all people would be here in the Otherworlder fortress. As the Apostle of Emroy, I go where I please," Rory replied, as she came alongside the former queen. "I must say, it has been a while since I last saw you, Your Majesty." "Please. I am no longer a queen to my people," Tyul replied, as she looked down in shame. "I no longer deserve such a title after what happened to my people." "It was not your fault, Your Majesty. You could not have known Zorzel would have doubled back on his word." Tyul looked at the demi-goddess in surprise. How did you?" "Soldiers love to boast about their supposed victories," Rory replied. "I actually met a number of soldiers who took part in the war against your people. They all said that their prince tricked the battle queen of the warrior bunnies into surrendering herself, then made her people think that she was responsible for her defeat. They all praised him for his treachery. They were not wrong though," Tyul said sadly, as her guilt began to wash over her once again. "I was supposed to save them and our homes. It's because of me that we lost everything." "So is that why you allowed yourself to become Zorzel's plaything for so long?" the apostle asked the former battle queen. "You allowed yourself to be violated by him for almost 3 years as some form of punishment for yourself. I know you could have killed him anytime you wanted, it was not beyond your capability." I was waiting on the right moment to kill him," Tyul shot back angrily, usually a bad idea to do when dealing with someone named Rory the Reaper. "No. You did not kill him because you thought you deserved whatever sadistic things he did to you," the demi-goddess replied. Her voice never reaching the same levels as the bunny woman, but her tone still struck a chord with the former queen. It was true, it was all true. As much as she did not want to admit it, Tyul knew that there were more than a few times in the past where she could have easily dispatched Zorzel. She could have easily killed the crown prince and make it either look like an accident or even pin the assassination on one of the many enemies the prince had. But why didn't she? Why didn't Tyul do any of this and allowed herself to be rutted by the prince on an almost daily basis for over 3 years? The answer was, she genuinely believed that she deserved it. Despite her undying hatred for the Satyran Empire, Tyul hated herself even more. She was the one who was supposed to save her people, she was the one who her people trusted to save them and their lands from the Empire. But in the end, she had failed. She failed her people, and thanks to the prince's lies, they all hated her for it. Tyul could not even remember just how many times she had encountered other enslaved former warriors, only for them to attack and even assault their former queen. She was the reason their homes were destroyed, she was the reason their people were now nothing more than high-priced sex slaves, she was the reason for all their suffering, and they were right. It was her fault, it was all her fault. Your Majesty, you made a terrible mistake and nothing you do now will ever change that fact. Rory admonished the once proud queen. But drowning yourself in self-pity is not going to help you either. Especially now that you have to strike back at the prince. What? Tyul asked the younger-looking woman. What do you mean? For someone who hates the Empire, I thought you would realize the opportunity you now have. Rory said playfully, her trademark smile flashing across the childlike face. the Empire angered an opponent they have no hopes of defeating. The Empire killed many of their fellow countrymen in cold blood, and there are many from their world demanding justice. Tell me then, asked Tyul, can you help me to see their commander? There's something I need to talk with him. In a makeshift hospital, the casualties of the earthquake from Italica and some from neighboring communities were treated and cared for under the watchful eye of Henry Blake and his hastily assembled collection of doctors, nurses, healers, and other volunteers. Colonel Blake and Captain Newsom had been joined by Captain Pock and Captain Ho, giving at least a little respite to the two weary surgeons. As was the case with the search and rescue parties, there was no shortage of volunteers to help out. Again, many Inferni stepped forward and took instruction on how to dress wounds or volunteered to cook, clean, empty bedpans or anything else required. Many of them saw this as a chance to show that they were more than a group to be tolerated but actually as valuable members of the community. As it was, the Church Mother and the High Lady of Clans both worked with Colonel Blake and Countess Mayui to make the hospital the center of all relief activities. Such as when an Inferni teacher named Grace led the orphan charges under her care to take shelter there, keeping especially close to a young wolf boy she would later reveal was born with a hearing loss as she spoke to the boy she called Peter, through hand signals, and helped keep him and the other children calm as his brother clung to her as well. The merchant, Liudo, led the city's merchant cartels in offering his wagons as ambulances. Even some among the convicts of Italica distinguished themselves working to clear rubble as the search for survivors continued. Tired from hours of digging, the members of House Taylor, as some called it, paid a visit to the recovery wards to see the two women, Abigail and Cass, whom they had rescued. It was a welcome respite, especially for Taylor and Panache, who now waited for news from other hamlets in the area. They were escorted by Corporal Klinger, who glanced around as Panache and the others formed a veritable box around Taylor. Here we are, sir. They insisted on having cots next to each other. I guess this sort of thing, if it don't tear folks apart, it really brings them together. I think you're right, Corporal. Thank you, Taylor nodded. They needed this. The Inferni girl, Abigail, looked up and gently roused her comrade. Strangely, as the Thraken looked up at him, her eyes showed no sign of familiarity even though she had spoken to him. Also, the eyes looked different, somehow. They were still a violet hue, but the electrical fire he had seen in them before was absent. Though certainly the conditions at the time probably affected her memory and his recollection as well. Hello again, he told them. We're happy to meet the two of you under better circumstances than the first time. Have we met before? The Thraken asked, looking at them. The local rumor mill had been quite thorough in describing Lord Atami and Lord Taylor, and words of their more recent exploits had painted them as larger-than-life figures. Of course, if this was Taylor, then his companions were his ladies, led by the knight, Lady Panache. It was a thrilling and also an intimidating moment. I'm sure the light makes things look a little different here than down under that building, Taylor replied. The girl's eyes widened at this. We just wanted to make sure you were all right. And you have. Taylor turned to Aurelia as she spoke. Except that the bunny girl had an odd smile, the smile of someone who knew a secret, in her eyes, normally a dazzling green, now had that same electrical spark that the Thraken girl's eyes had earlier. Aurelia held up a hand. Peace to you. I mean no threat or harm to you or Aurelia. Who are you? Nayu demanded, warily. I am Mirita, she said simply. Goddess, the Thraken girl exclaimed. She started to rise, but a hand from Mirita stopped her. Rest, my faithful Cass. You have been so faithful to me. I wish to be here for you. She turned to Taylor and Panache. I cannot inhabit this body for long, or it would be harmful to Aurelia. As I said, I do not wish that. What I wish is to grant you my favor in return for saving Cass and Abigail. You're welcome, Taylor answered as if that was all. Mirita let out the smallest shy smile that seemed out of place yet absolutely adorable on Aurelia. I am afraid that my offering of this boon is not simply a matter of gratitude, though I am very grateful. Cass has been very devoted in my service, and Abigail's people have been quite generous to my followers. I wish to grant both of them a boon. Your people are strong and many, and they could offer sanctuary to both the Inferni, who have been friends of my temple, and to the followers of my true temple. Further, you are becoming known in this world. Yourself and Lord Atami, your deeds speak well of you, and with the blessings of the gods, your lands will prosper. I will give Cass to serve your house as guardian and as my representative. I ask that with your blessing, Cass will build a temple, the sign that my believers will be welcome in your lands. And again, that the Inferni will know sanctuary in your lands. If you were to allow this, I will be able to reward both Cass and Abigail as they deserve, and I will in exchange promise your tree will be strong and fruitful. Panache frowned. What about Aurelia? I offer my blessings to all of your house. My dearest, Aenair said, it would be wise to accept her offer. Panache looked at Naiu and they both nodded. It is a small cost. The favor of one of the gods of Falmart is not to be lightly spurned, Naiu told Taylor. If I recall, it was Myrida who supposedly cursed an entire company back at Alnus, Taylor observed. The goddess shook her head. They violated the sanctuary of my temple. Well, what was supposed to be my temple? Even if they had been led astray, they were still mine to protect, and I did release those men as soon as their captain apologized, Myrida pointed out. Taylor rubbed his eyes and looked at Cass and Abigail. Well, I suppose I should ask what the two of you think about all this. Merida is most kind and generous, Cass replied. I will gladly serve her wishes and will serve your house well. Abigail smiled. God's will is kind. Taylor thought the terms were not unreasonable. At least no one was wanting him to sign a marriage agreement. He admitted that Cass and Abigail were both attractive, but he thought he had his hands full with four. Not to complain too much, but why not Atami? While Atami had not yet managed to hook up with any titles or estates granted outside of the Uile, and the great wealth given to him in the form of the dragon's seed was currently more theoretical than practical, any groups declared under his protection could also be assumed to be under Rory's protection as well. Well, Rory is just a little scary, Myrida admitted. Inwardly, Captain Harrington frowned. After what had happened in the Emperor's palace, everyone knew some sort of retaliation was in the offering. Logically and rationally, he, Major Nayutabaru, and Lieutenant Theisman all understood this. Emotionally, however, they all felt the brass had taken a piss-poor time to do it. Sidera was still digging itself out from the earthquake. The smoke from fires could still be seen rising over the city. Akusho was in somewhat better shape with the advanced warning Taiwal had provided, coupled with Major Nayutabaru's quick action had prevented many casualties and many fires, but even here all hands were busy digging out survivors and containing the few fires that had sprung up. The one lucky break for everyone in the district was that the Imperial Army was far too busy in the rest of Sidera to start nosing around and inquiring why Akusho, of all places, was less of a disaster than the rest of the city. Akusho had pretty much been used to being its own city. A city that had its laws imposed from its powerful next-door neighbor, but whose enforcers were normally too intimidated to go into Akusho in any official capacity at all. There had been a few punitive incursions into Akusho over the centuries, and those had been by multiple legions, but nowadays, spare legions were hard to come by, and no one in Akusho, the team at Bletchley Park included, wanted to give any incentive to the government to find the troops required to conduct a spring cleaning. In the narrow streets of Akusho, even a troop equipped with modern weapons could find itself cut off and trapped by an enemy that was patient enough and ruthless enough. But now the need to respond to what had transpired at the palace meant bringing in more people and running the risk of possible exposure. Harrington was not worried about Willis and Jansen. The two affable Air Force officers and their equipment wouldn't likely cause much trouble. At least one of their girls had loudly and firmly announced her intention to have them before they left Akusho. This brought a much-needed touch of amusement, even, especially as the two skinny officers still volunteered what time they had to join in search and rescue parties and clearing debris alongside everyone else. But soon, additional Special Forces troops would be arriving, and there was a risk that their activities could possibly be tracked back to Akusho, and if that happened, a great many people would be made to pay for it. Personally, Captain Harrington had advised that only his people should operate in Akusho, and he would have preferred to wait until the city calmed down a bit, but he was informed that other teams would need access to the Akusho safehouse. Sorry, Captain, Lieutenant Nash apologized. We've got a list of names and the command want us knocking on doors as soon as possible. Operation Spartacus begins tonight. Let's hope it goes off better than the original. In the morning following the bombing, it was announced to the people that the Imperial Forum had been damaged as a result of further aftershakes from the Great Earthshake, as it was now being called. Not that much of the public cared. Their own immediate problems were much more pressing on their attention. In the meantime, Her Imperial Highness, Princess Pina, with the tacit approval of the Emperor, had taken steps to deal with the growing crisis in the quake-ravaged capital. Her first order was to activate the Company of the Blue Rose. Though still in training, Pina believed they were up to the tasks she had planned for them. In calling upon them to meet the current crisis, it would be a learning experience like nothing their instructors could possibly give them. With her experienced knight currently needed either in Italica or protecting the Jade Palace, Pina, based upon the recommendation of the instructors, appointed a promising young woman of 17 years named Amaretto to be the acting commander of the Blue Rose. Pina assigned half of the available instructors to advise Amaretto and the other senior students while the other instructors were directed to begin assembling the next class, for the moment to be designated as the Company of the Pink Rose. The Company of the Blue Rose was charged with getting the main streets of the city cleared and opened to allow for food and other aid to be brought into ruined neighborhoods, aid that would soon be coming as Pina did not wait for the Senate before ordering Hamilton to buy up whatever wheat and whatever other food that could be had to be brought into the devastated city. She had gone further, however, and upon the advice of one of her old tutors, a man named Casmiz, she contacted Lord Cicero and other members of the Senate's peace faction, and outlined her ideas for city relief and encouraged them to come forward and offer whatever they could, be it money, manpower, equipment or supplies to help in relieving the city. Several of them were able to offer up contingents of their own retainers who would aid the city guard in curbing lawlessness in the streets. Cicero had gone further, using his contacts to arrange for several mercenary companies to assemble just outside the city's boundaries, should they be needed to suppress any mass violence that might erupt amid the chaos. This had the added advantage of making these men unavailable to be hired by individuals possibly with other aims. Pina understood that danger of a coup or an uprising was a real possibility. The danger came from two possible sources: genuinely terrified people who even now wanted to know, who had so offended which of the gods, into striking out against them with such anger and violence. And, whose head do we give the gods in begging for their mercy? Pina wasn't sure about the gods, but she was fairly confident most of the temples would prefer to help calm the people, although they would surely attempt to suggest that additional tithings might help the gods to look more favorably upon everyone. Most of the temples were, after all, as invested in the same system as anyone else. With the exception of a few odd cults and splinter temples, of course. Though some people were actively looking at the state of the temples themselves, perhaps wondering if a war among the gods was at hand and trying to figure out which gods had the edge. This threat was diffuse and therefore unlikely to materialize unless it found a specific agreed-upon culprit to blame for the people's ills. There were a couple she might be willing to toss to the mob for their arrogance and blind stupidity, but while the satisfaction would be immense, it would also be temporary, as a mob, once started, did not sat at a mere couple of heads. The other threat was more dangerous: that an existing individual or group already desiring to overturn the state might take advantage of the current situation to incite an uprising. Pina had no intention of allowing such an opportunity to present itself. There were other measures which needed to be taken. All the available manpower that could be organized was needed to combat the fires burning in the city. Also, Pina intended to visit the Way of the Gods and speak to the heads of the temples to see what help they could be persuaded to offer. But first, in the aftermath of the attack on the Forum during the night, the Senate had hurried into emergency session. It was odd, Pina thought, that when the rest of the capital was in peril, the majority of the senators were content to take their time and not act with unseeming hurry, but when they felt a threat to their own necks, the senators had rushed to convene. It was a lesson that she would not forget, that while there were great men among the Senate, there were far more small men who would gladly sacrifice anyone so they could keep their now perforated seats. Pina watched as Marquis Castle took to the floor to speak. While he faced Emperor Molt, the senator's target was another person seated up in the gallery. Zorzel's face was still bandaged and swollen after the vicious beating he had received at the hands of Sergeant Kuribayashi. The anger from his humiliation still clearly burned, now stoked even higher by the destruction of his triumphal statues that stood outside his palace. While Zorzel did not know how the barbarians had carried out their cowardly attack, he was certain they were responsible somehow. Personally, Pina would have agreed with him. He had enraged the Japanese officials greatly with his treatment of Noriko. They clearly intended for him the same message they had just sent these senators, that Japan and her allies considered the persons of their citizens sacrosanct and that they would punish whoever stood in the way of recovering their people. Of course, this was not something the average citizen in the street could be expected to understand, so it was not surprising when Pina's aide, Shandy, reported that a rumor was circulating that the crown prince had offended Palapon, the god of vengeance. In the days ahead, Pina's sister Claudia would pay a considerable tithing to Palapon's temple to not refute this rumor. "I have a question, Your Majesty," Castle began. "According to Lord Cicero, the Japanese emissary and their allies have offered to make peace and even held several meetings. If that is the case, then how do you explain this?" He gestured to one of the pillars where chunks of steel were still embedded in it, and then to the hole in the dome of the forum. "Why did they attack this place, the center of our government and its laws?" Molt remained silent. Frankly, he was quite tired of all this. "If you will not answer, Your Majesty," Castle said after a moment, "then I will. It all started with those people we captured from the other side of the gate." Now, the senator did throw a scathing glance at Zorzel. The moment their commander had found out about this, he ordered one of his soldiers to beat Prince Zorzel to near death, until he'll confess about the other slaves. Why is that? To her dismay, Pina saw that many in the Senate seemed confused and puzzled at this, with some actually expressing their disbelief at this. Pina rose from her seat and stepped toward Marquis Castle. But it was to the Senate at large she addressed her response to. "The reasoning is so obvious that a blind man could see the answer and the deaf could hear it and recognize its truth," she said in a scathing tone. "Have we become so arrogant and blind that we cannot recognize those same qualities we praise in ourselves and others? Do we believe that we, alone, are capable of pride in our people, alone in valuing loyalty to our own? Do we believe that others will not respond if we strike at their land and their people just as we have always done when outsiders threaten the security of our nation?" Many senators flinched as if flailed by her words. She spared them not, for it was past time to stop playing games. "Of course, we do. We have always ignored the pride of others. The empire has always enjoyed the power and privilege to disregard the wishes of our neighbors and their feelings. Now, we are face to face with a people that are strong enough to demonstrate their resolve that their demands be heard. They will not conveniently go away, so we may enjoy a blissful ignorance. As we would demand of any who dared make slaves of the citizens of our own empire, so does Japan and allied nations' forces are now demand of us. The only difference is that they are willing to offer us a choice, to live in peace and gain from their knowledge, or fight them and bring their fury upon us. And the destruction of my brother's palace, as well the attack on the Senate's building, is the solid proof that they do mean business and not joking around, when it gets to it. And their leader, Centurion Prime, is the same man the apostles prophesied to be the destroyer of the empire." "What?" gasped one of the senators. "Princess, are you saying?" "Yes," said Pina, "Centurion Prime is the man with the fist of the North Star. I know that, because I saw with my own eyes, how he used that same fist to defeat a horde of mercenaries at the Italica. Yet he offered me a friendship in order to help me to achieve the peace between the empire and the other world." "A friendship," said another senator, "surely, that this is some kind of a trick." "It's not a trick," shot back Pina. "Centurion is quite sincere. When he explained to me, why did the allied nations' forces has come to our world? They're here to find and bring back the people we've taken from the other side of the gate, and they want each one of them. And secondly, they're here to punish those, who's responsible for such inhumane attack on the innocent civilians." "Inhumane," said the third senator. "Princess, are you protecting these barbarians?" "Barbarians?" Pina glared at him with annoyed look. "It is our own troopers, which attacked their world, who acted as the barbarians. Even after all these days, I still cannot understand what madness has possessed them, so that they kill all those poor innocent women and children with such brutality." Exclamation mark. "It's one thing to see beastmen to act so barbarously, but our own soldiers. I have never been so ashamed of my life. This was an expedition force my father has sended to the other side of the gate. It's as if some bandits has attacked Sidera, killed several of our own nobles and took their women as their slaves. How do you think our own empire would respond to this barbarous act?" She then turned to Zorzel's direction. "But the worst of this was my own brother's sadistic ways of pleasure. She continued without even trying to spare Zorzel. If it wasn't for his own constant seek of sexual escapades and other young women, none of what happened to him would have happened. All this happened because when he showed up with one of his slaves, who just happened to be a Japanese, he started to beating her and torturing her, right in front of the man, who's already know well enough about Zorzel's sadistic ways, but that didn't stop him from getting enraged. Centurion acted the same way, as the winged lion, whose cub was been taken away. And this is the consequence of Zorzel's actions. They've destroyed his home as a punishment and as a reminder to anyone who holds their people as slaves, that if they won't cooperate with them, the same fate will await their houses as well. Also, they want to end this war, that's why they've attacked this building, but didn't destroy it in order to warn us. If we continue this war, the next time Senate building will be destroyed for real. Make no mistake, senators, these people may be kind to their friends, but merciless to their enemies and willing to achieve their goals by all means necessary. Speak for yourself, Pina, spat Zorzel, you've been mingling with the enemy that opposes us and our empire. How can we trust that you're not a deserter? Or perhaps even a spy? His words were harsh, filled with disdain. You are a disgrace to the empire, and you take pride in it. You are throwing away our very history as the conquerors we are known to be. He spat the words out as if they were poison. Do not question my loyalty to the empire, brother, shot back Pina. Her voice was cutting through the tension in the room. For I and my order are the only ones trying to save us from the doom that you have rekindled and brought upon us all. Pina stood tall, her eyes narrowing, her voice rising with defiance. You should have thought with your own head, not your own ego, brother. That's enough, said Molt, stopping both sibling bickering. Pina, do you have more to say? Yes, father, I do, answered Pina, then turned to other senators. The allied nations truly pursue peace with us, but, as I mentioned before, the actions of my brother have not gone unanswered by their armed forces. What I am offering, and what I encourage, is a voice of reason. We must, for once, abandon our pride for the sake of survival. If we continue to fight an enemy we cannot defeat, our empire will be erased from the face of the map. You must understand that they are good people, but we have crossed the line. Now they are willing to make us to submit to their demands or destroy us, and we have no one to blame for this tragedy but ourselves. Do we really want to destroy our own home for our own pride? Or do we want to preserve it, so that we live more in happiness and peace with those from the other side? The choice is ours. Either we proceed with the peace talks and save the empire from its destruction, or we can resume the war and see our own homes burned to the ground. The time for denying the truth are over. Now's the time for facing the truth. Do we choose war and death, or peace and life? Pina's words were heavy with the truth of what was at stake, taking root in the minds of those who listened. However, there were those from Hawk's party, who still believe that they can defeat the other worlders. Seated among the senators, Septimus Del Maris sat considering the princess's words. It was obvious that Her Highness, though speaking from conviction, was truly naive. War did not allow for enemies to show compassion. The nation that failed to destroy its enemies when it could, would inevitably be destroyed by them given time. It was a fundamental truth. So if Japan wanted peace, then they had a reason. The senator did not know if that reason was that they wanted to keep the empire intact as a slave state, or perhaps they had other enemies. Was that it? Did these off-worlders propose peace because they had other, more dangerous foes elsewhere? Whatever the reason, Septimus thought it might be possible to wait the invaders out. While not as thrilling as the stories of the empire's heroes from ages past, it was better than seeing his son become a slave, himself. He had much to consider. What Septimus did not consider, and what would have given him grave worry, was that the eyes of Prince Zorzel were now upon him. It would have disturbed the senator greatly what thoughts were going on behind those eyes. Nor did he know that past sins would soon demand a reckoning. Suddenly, a man burst inside. Your Majesty, he shouted, the other worlders are throwing some kind of papers into Sidera. What? Gasped Molt. He then took a look and saw a mass of paper, falling from the sky. All the senators went out to see this strange rain, but as they picked up the paper, they saw something that made their blood chilled. Ultimatum from the Allied nations force to the Emperor Molt Saul Augustus. The Allied nations forces are now fully aware that you, the Emperor of Sateran Empire, and your son Zorzel El Caesar were holding the citizens of the Allied nations' countries as your slaves. Such actions are seen by our governments as cruel and barbaric, as well unforgivable. Therefore, the Allied Nations Command has decided to send you this ultimatum. You have 10 days, starting from today, to finally sign the unconditional surrender of your empire, or we'll start the final assault on Sidera. At the end of the deadline, we will destroy several of your military installations to prove that we do mean business. After that, you'll have 24 hours to surrender or face the full destruction of your empire. The choice is yours, Your Majesty, either surrender, or be destroyed. At his father's home, Zorzel was laying on the bed with ice pack on his head, when Diabo came to him. "What do you want, Diabo?" asked Zorzel. "Just to see how you're doing, brother," answered Diabo. "Do you like to see me bruised and beaten? Heavens forbid. Although you do admit that this is all your fault. I told you that one day your escapades will get you into this. How am I know all this? How you forgot that I'm just a fool. I'm not that clever as you, Diabo. I pretend that way, so I don't get killed like Kati. Our father was much younger back then, but now, he's much older. I've been hearing that you've been aiming for the throne by pulling some strings in the Senate. What gives you that idea? Your trip to the north to Mudran family was quite heard of. Why did you go there? That's none of your business. It is, if it's considering Mudran's connections and the fact that he's one of the main player in the Slaver Guild. Including about those other worlders, who's become slaves. Yes, I know that. But you see, I was actually went to Mudran to buy those slaves for my mines. Why then Mudran? You could go to the others. And risk myself to be get killed, like Count Mesto. I'm not that stupid. I see. So, what about the Senate? I do not care about that. As much as I concern, you, father and the rest of the family can do with it all that you want for all I care. I've got my own prerogatives to worry about. And Pina, what do you mean? Don't you know? She's been also with you lately. Was that has to do with the other worlders? Well, I do have to admit, that she did asking about my dealing with the senators and Slaver Guild, but that's all. Right now, it's best for us to give them those slaves back, so that they'll leave us alone. You better be careful, Diabo, said Zorzel, do not try to play against the Empire, and me. What do you mean? It's quite simple. You see, our father will be forced to resign as the Emperor, but in order to maintain his control over the Empire, he'll choose me as his successor. But that would be quite irresponsible for him, especially after that stunt you've pulled off last night. Do you really think he would have any other choice? The senators from the Hawk Party will force him to make me his successor, otherwise, he would be risking his own crown, or a head. Considering that he's not in much of a favor in Senate, he'll have no other choice but to choose me. And do you really think that the Hawks will have you as their leader? They don't care. All they need is someone from the royal family to represent them. For them, I'll be a perfect figurehead, but what they don't know is that all will be running the show, while they'll have no other choice but to obey me. And you really sure that they will obey you? Have you forgotten, Diabo, that in certain extreme situations, the Emperor has certain ways to maintain his power? You mean, the special laws? Precisely. Once the father is out of the way, I'll declare a state of emergency, considering that we're already facing a crisis. Then I'll form my own special group out of those who loyal to me that will enforce my own laws. With such measures, the Hawks will have no other choice than to obey me. Wait, did you say that you're gonna remove our father? He's already a political dead weight. He's lost the war, the vassals has turned their back on him, the people are angry, the Senate is against him. With such conditions, he has no other choice than to resign, of course, then to hand the crown to me, hoping that he'll be in control. But of course, it's no problem for me to remove my father from my backside by saying, perhaps, he's gone ill and not capable of advising me anymore. The nobles wouldn't mind that. They need a strong leader, the one who'll lead them to victory. Or you're saying that you're gonna resume the war with the ANF. But that way, you'll be risking to start the civil war. Other nobles, who's against the Hawks, will join the ANF and form their own government, which will be recognized as the legitimate by others. So what? By doing this, they'll be considered as traitors, and we have ways to deal with the traitors. Speaking about the traitors, Diabo, you should know that Pina's actions are also to be considered as treason against the Empire. Guess she'll be dealt with the same way as others. So I strongly suggest that you should pick your side carefully, minor penis. Father is out of the question, his days are numbered, so you better find yourself a place at the side of new ruler of the empire. I'll be waiting for your answer. Now, leave me. Cassiopeia, dear. Yes, your highness, asked the Vulpine, entering the room. Have you brought the oil I've asked? Certainly, your highness. I'll personally rub into you, so it will soothe your wounds. I can't hardly wait, my dear. As Diabo leaves, he was hearing quite odd sounds coming from the room. By the gods, he groaned, facepalming, he's really an idiot. He does not pretending to be an idiot, he is the idiot. And to make matters worse, they'll gonna have him as the new emperor. I must find Pina right away. At her own mansion, Pina was startled to hear Diabo's news. He's gonna do what? Gasped Pina. He's planning to rise up against our father and declare himself as the new emperor, answered Diabo. I'm telling you, that idiot has gone mad. Did he really said that? He told me right in his own room, when I visited him, answered Diabo. He said, that once father is out of the way, he'll declare martial law and resume the war against the ANF. But that could only happen, when our father will be forced to resign, answered Pina, otherwise, the nobles wouldn't accept him as the new emperor. That's exactly what he's waiting for, said Diabo. Once father will be forced to resign his crown because of the loss of the war, Zorzel will move in and take over the throne. Do you really think he'll do that? Of course he will. Haven't you forgot, Pina? He's a total idiot. There are two kinds of idiots. One is a clever idiot, who understand that he's an idiot, and stupid idiot, who thinks that he's a genius, but in reality, he's nothing more than an idiot. And our idiot brother has said that I should choose sides between him or you. Me? Surprised Pina. Why me? Because he knows that you're practically the main obstacle who stands in his way, answered Diabo. You must always remember, Pina, an idiot in rule, like Zorzel, is dangerous not just for themselves, but for others as well, because he drags anyone around him towards destruction. He's even said to risk a civil war between those who sided with him, and those who'll join the ANF, for the sake of defeating the other worlders. Civil war? Gasped Pina. Father said that our empire cannot handle this kind of damage. Exactly, said Diabo. I really wish now I can meet with Centurion Prime. Why? Asked curious Pina. There's something I need to talk about with him, answered Diabo. Your wish is granted, my young prince, suddenly heard another voice. Both Pina and Diabo gasped, as they saw Centurion materializing from thin air. It is good to finally meet you, Diabo el Caesar. He bowed to stun Diabo. I've been looking forward for this meeting. You're quite surprising man, Sir Prime, said Diabo. So are you, your highness, answered Centurion. Now, what exactly are you wanna talk with me? You must do something to stop Zorzel, said Diabo. He's gonna become a new emperor. That is not our concern. Centurion waved his hand, stopping Diabo. You must understand that our rule forbids us to interfere into other states' internal business. Our main goal is to defeat the empire and to retrieve our people that's been captured and enslaved. Whatever domestic squabbles for power you've got in Sidera is none of our business. So that means, said Diabo, you'll remain idle. No, of course not, answered Centurion. Officially, we're not involved into your political intrigues, but unofficially, we are ready to help anyone who seeks peace with us. So you're planning to save the doves, asked Diabo, should Zorzel's repressions fall on them? Precisely, answered Centurion, we'll have them all, as well their families, evacuated to another city, shall we say, Italica, where they'll form their own government. Zorzel already foreseen that, noted Diabo. True, nodded Centurion, but he doesn't know, is that when the legitimate government formed, they'll sign a peace treaty with the ANF, as well form a pact that will allow us to do anything we see fit to Zorzel and the Hawks. After all, they are the main culprits in Ginza incident, so we can do anything we want with them. We're not sentimental, your highness, so when it comes to deal with the criminals, like Zorzel and his bunch, we can be even more ruthless than he was. So you can be sure that for this idiot emperor his rule will be quite short. I see, said Diabo, you've already planned your next moves. Not exactly, answered Centurion, we're only thinking several steps ahead, but the realty has always changed any plans. As they say in my world, no good plan survived direct contact with the enemy. That's why we plan our moves very carefully, so when the reality hits, we can always correct them in short time. So, what about Pina? Asked Diabo, are you really planning to have her as the new head of this government? Pina, hearing this, have turned red, almost to the color of her hair. In due time, your highness, smiled Centurion, in due time. I'm sure, that when the time comes, she'll be more than ready to accept the mantle she'll have. After all, she is one of the biggest patriots of the empire. Yeah, snorted Diabo, except that Zorzal believes, that she's a traitor, who's collaborating with the enemy. You know better, than I am, your highness, answered Centurion, that the best way to save the empire is to make peace with the ANF, so at this point, cooperating with us is the way of the patriot. After all, what kind of a patriotism Zorzal and his bunch could be talking about, if they only care for making the war with the ANF and invading our lands? That is not a patriotism, your highness, it's called jingoism. And mixing a jingoist with the patriot is a bad mistake. A true patriot cares for his country, but jingoist only sees his country as a tool to satisfy his own political agenda. Your brother Zorzal and the Hawks are the worst kind of jingoists, who might destroy the empire and its people, while Pina is working with us to save the people of the empire. That's the difference between her and your brother. What about me? Asked Diabo, have you got any plans about my role in future government? You're so perceptive, your highness, smiled Centurion, it's just so happened, that I've been talking about you with my superiors and Lady Octavia Germanicus, and they all agree, that you should be leading this new government as the new prime minister. Diabo, hearing this, couldn't believe his ears. These other worlders proposed to him become something, who'll be practically second to the emperor himself. Or you're saying, he asked, that I should rule this new government aside with Pina? Why not? Centurion shrugged his shoulders, your sister has charisma, she's a perfect warrior and a diplomat, yet she lacking experience needed to run the government. You, on the other hand, have the administration skills you need to run the government, plus, you're quite good with politics. I'd say, with your sister as the new leader and you as the new head of the government, you'll be a perfect tandem. It always worked in our world's history, so why not it doesn't work here? I'd say, you and Pina can easily fill each other, practically two sides of the same coin. Diabo thinked about Centurion's proposal and considered, that he's right, with him as the second in the government, he'll have more power behind the throne, than he should have as the emperor himself. This was actually his chance to become, what he always wanted to be. Sir Prime, he said, it seems, that you've been giving me an offer I simply cannot refuse. So you agree, brother? Asked Pina. Yes, Pina, said Diabo, turning to her, I've decided, I shall gladly join you in your government. However, there's still matter of Zorzal becoming a new emperor. Oh, I think, that part will be solved by Mold himself, said Centurion, considering, that he saw, how poorly Zorzal performed last night, he's probably already thinking about someone, who should lead the empire to peace, not to war. So you're saying, that our father will choose Pina over Zorzal? Asked Diabo, what about Claudia and Livia? They're out of count, Centurion waved his hand again, Livia is already has become a regent mother of the king, while Claudia is too old to rule the empire. Having one of them to become a new successor is like giving an old fool a sword and hoping, that he won't stab himself. No, both Livia and Claudia are not counted. If anybody now, who's got the better chance to lead the new government, is you and Pina. But how can you be sure, that the emperor choose me, Sir Prime? Asked Pina, or you're able to read his minds or see the future. Don't be ridiculous, Pina, laughed Centurion, I was only making my logical guesses, based on the situation and psychology. You see, Moldes already know, that his plans to stall the peace talks are deader, than disco, and he also understand, that he cannot control this idiot he called his son. With that been said, he's got no other choice, than to choose someone, who will be able to put an end to the mess he made by starting this war. And who would be better choice, than you, Pina? You've been learning, like Zorzal, and you've already grown from a pretender knight to a real warrior and from an amateur to the real diplomat. No, Pina, if anybody, who's now have more chances to become new successor, is you. And I believe that Molt will also make this decision, it's just a matter of time. Sounds like you've got everything settled, Sir Prime, said Diabo. Very well, you have my support to the future government. Thank you, Your Highness, said Centurion. By the way, I've heard it, that you've taken over the Minotaro province. Yes, I did, answered Diabo. I've also freed the slaves Mudran family took from your people and have them living in my special clinic. I can have them returned to you as soon as possible. Well, that's an excellent work you've did, Your Highness, smiled Centurion. I shall inform my commanders, so that they'll send their forces to Minotaro province to retrieve our people. We can talk about further deals later. I look forward to, Sir Prime, said Diabo, then he leaves. Pina and Centurion watched, as Diabo leaves her mansion. Your brother is quite complicated individual, Your Highness, said Centurion. I know, answered Pina, he's been always one of the smartest in our family. Do you think that he'll accept the proposal to lead the new government, Sir Prime? When it comes to choose between that idiot Zorzel and you, Your Highness, answered Centurion, I believe the choice is obvious. However, right now, we need to worry about Zorzel. If he's gonna try a coup against his father, we're talking about real troubling times. You need to be ready for this, Pina. Now, listen carefully. This is what you must do in case of Zorzel's mutiny and what you cannot do. Follow these instructions to the letter, for them means your own life. The smoke could be seen for miles. The estate of a prosperous slave dealer had been reduced to stone and ashes. It would be a perplexing sight that greeted the local patrol when they came to property was found to be abandoned. No dogs or horses or wagons. No slaves were found in the pens, even though Varys normally had a couple of score even when his inventory was low. The family and servants were all missing. The only bodies found were those of some of Varys' henchmen and his private soldiers that he employed. Most of them apparently killed by an expert hand, a single slash across the throat. There was no evidence of a slave revolt. If there clearly should have been slaves among the dead or signs of wounded. There were just a few found dead and those that were missing. One body that was found was different from all the others. The hulking former centurion who served as Varys' foreman was found dead under a tree, a dagger driven deep into his ribs, obviously by someone very strong. This was further perplexing because although a slave might harbor such hate, any slave strong enough for this would likely have been sold off to the mines fairly quickly. The imperial silver mines at Argentus always needed strong labor and the empire always needed silver. Especially now. What was much more worrisome was the note found pinned to the tree above the body. Written recognizably in both populary and in the high tongue was a warning. We are Spartacus. Freedom to the slaves. Down with the oppression. Those who enslave others shall know our wrath. Long live Spartacus. Chapter 31. Pay the piper. The Chamberlain was annoyed. Though he knew he should not allow his emotions to affect how he spoke to his prince, it was his duty to remind His Highness that certain things were unbecoming of the next emperor. He took the prince's robe off the chair where it had been draped and pointedly presented it to Zorzel. Your Highness, your guests are assembled and waiting. Yes, yes, Zorzel waved him off as he rose from atop Cassiopeia, somewhat annoyed at having been interrupted. His body still ached and his face was still extremely sore, and thanked the gods that the new cook had been able to fix a palatable meal that didn't send him into agony with every mouthful. But Cassiopeia had been wonderfully skilled in bed, pleasing him in ways he had never considered and all the while revering him as she should. He knew the skill was hers, but he never felt more powerful. And this self-important functionary had completely spoiled the mood. And yet the Chamberlain was not done. Honestly, sire. Sullying yourself with a beast girl. I'm open-minded, Quirus. You should try it sometime. Quirus looked disgusted. What would the Senate and the people think if you sired by this beast? With lightning speed, Cassiopeia swiftly got up and snatched hold of the man by his collar. Her sharp fangs were showing as she advanced on him. If I should be blessed by the gods to bear the child of the next emperor, the Senate and the people should rejoice. She spat right into frightened man's face, for, whomever his mother would be, his father would be the greatest of all men. And that alone would make him, the son of your next emperor, far greater than a groveling pig like you could ever be. Cassiopeia, Zorzel said mildly, nodding for her to release Quirus. Still, even as she obeyed, he admitted to taking enjoyment at watching the Chamberlain's look of fear. Cassiopeia was quite correct. The son of the emperor should automatically command respect, no matter what his bloodline. It was time some of these people learned their place. Following his gesture, Cassiopeia released Quirus. You should kneel in thanks to his greatness that he did not let me rip out your tongue, she spat at him. Quirus glanced nervously at the prince. He decided not to chance his lord's temper and bowed low. Thank you for your mercy. I apologize for my words, your highness. Zorzel smiled and straightened him up, clearly amused. All is forgiven, loyal Quirus. He patted him on the arm. Just remember that when you speak to her, you speak to me. Remember that, and everything will be well. Why? Yes, my lord. Zorzel smiled and glanced at Cassiopeia. Tell me, have you attended to the other matter I told you to take care of? Yes, my lord, replied Cassiopeia. The senator's wife and son are in the parlor. Excellent, replied Zorzel. It seems we each have business to attend. I do hope we can rekindle the mood later this evening, he remarked as he dressed. As my lord wills, answered Cassiopeia. Then after Zorzel and Quirus had departed for his private meeting room, she readied herself and headed for the parlor where she was looking forward to a family reunion. Boro poured himself a drink from the bottle of spice wine. The Cerberus was one of a number of businesses run by Hario. It was a place where Boro could take care of the dirty details of his operations without attracting undue attention. Unfortunately, many of his businesses in Akusho were unavailable after the earthshake. Peculiarly, he hadn't gotten much word at all out of Akusho since the quake. No, to be honest, it had been weeks. Recruitment had dropped off and his contacts in the local underworld were telling him nothing. He suspected they were up to something, but even if they were, it wasn't like his entire power base was in Akusho. It made for convenient recruiting and it was a place where shadowy dealing could go on without imperial interference, but Boro had his claws in the underbelly of every city in the empire. The situation in Akusho would sort itself out in time, or once things calmed down, the new emperor might just have to send in the legions. Or simply burn the rats out, Boro figured. He was certain that would be a popular move with the good citizens of the empire. It would also spur reactions in the slums of every city in Falmart. So, Boro considered, if the residents of Akusho were up to something, then it would be a win-win for both himself and Zorzel to exterminate the scum. But that was the concern of another day. Today he was planning a farewell gift for a friend. His former partner, Taiul, was now a liability. His plan to put a Hario on the imperial throne did not need the threat of any counter-claimants, and unfortunately, that fool Zorzel had an urge to rut with any female he could get his hands on. Boro wasn't concerned about the slaves who were in Zorzel's palace, which was now still burning. They were all where he could keep an eye on them and if necessary. Well, accidents happened, but Taiul and Noriko were both with the cursed enemies at Alnus. They were a complication to his plans, especially if Taiul spilled her guts about their collaborations prior to her liberation. Fortunately, it was fairly easy to use Zorzel's notorious temper to paint Taiul and Noriko as having personally betrayed the prince. Boro then had to consider the best way to arrange for the two of them to die. There were a number of warrior bunnies who had sworn vengeance on Taiul, and through his tool in County Formar, Boro knew of one well placed to carry out the job. Of course, getting that particular warrior bunny to kill Taiul would be as simple as pointing her at the target. Hatred would do the rest. The problem was that she had no grudge against Noriko, so that would require other motivation. Fortunately, she was reported to be unswervingly loyal to the Countess of Formal. If Boro could make it look like an order from the Countess, or perhaps even someone above her. Like, say, Princess Pina. Boro smiled a cold, cruel smile. Of course, he had gotten silver from Zorzel to take care of the matter. Boro would make sure the prince's money was well spent. Or you understand, what you needs to do, he said to the person next to him. Of course, Master Boro, answered the hooded person, it shall be done. Tomorrow I'll be in Italica, where I shall meet your brother. Then, after that, I'll make sure that she does her job. Just remember that she has no grudge against that woman, said Boro. She also said to be in good relations with the other Worlders commander, who said to be more smarter than a fox. Don't worry, master, answered the person, if that rabbit goes off the track, I shall personally take care of those two. Just don't push your luck, Piper, snorted Boro. Remember, Hario clan is putting a great efforts on you, my dear. Now go. Yes, master, answered the person and leaves, while Boro continued his drink, while grinning. As promised, Zorzal's guests were all waiting for him to arrive. These men represented powerful elements in Sateran society in a way of life that was now under threat. I am glad to see all of you, Zorzal said, glancing around the room. There were those who said that the crown prince lacked skill in oratory, and while it was true that he tended to be poor at debating, he was quite good at rhetoric. Especially when he had time to prepare his remarks. Gentlemen, everything we value is now in danger from the off-world barbarians and those who would fall on their knees either fearing or fawning upon them. He looked around the room searching the expressions of his guests. Unfortunately, both my beloved sister and even His Majesty himself are now prepared to throw away centuries of pride and dignity and faith in the gods and, indeed, in the very spirit of our people to kneel before the barbarians. If we do not act, then the empire will be destroyed. Not by invaders from without, but by the traitors from within. One of his guests, a slave trader who had supported Zorzal since the days of the bunny suppression, leaned forward. At least 7 of my competitors have disappeared in the past few days. These rebels called Spartacus has gotten the rest of us looking over our shoulders constantly. I can't do business if my buyers can't find me, but I can't do business at all if I'm dead. You see, honest merchants living in fear. Zorzal looked to one of the senators in the room. And most of your colleagues are now willing to surrender to the cowards who are trying to undermine our society. With no disrespect, Your Highness, the senator answered. Just what can we do? We take back our country, noble Saterans, Zorzal replied. Quietly, mind Yule, or the sheep will panic. For a time now we will pretend to bend to the barbarians. We need time to gather our own forces to strike back. Certainly time to rebuild the army, another senator noted sourly. Yes, Zorzal agreed. But until we have fixed the Senate, and until His Majesty finds his spirit again, we need our own army. This talk could be seen as treason, one man cautiously observed. Treason, to save our beloved empire. Don't be ridiculous. I believe it would be real treason not to act, Zorzal replied. But we act to protect the imperial throne and all loyal Saterans. Remember that. In the meantime, we need fighting men. Mercenaries. Why not? One of the merchants replied. If we lose, these savages will take everything we've worked to build. I, for one, am not going to be judged by barbarians and have everything taken from me without a fight. Zorzal nodded. And of course, the empire should reward those who have acted to save it. Just as those who so spinelessly sell us into bondage to these off-worlders should reap the price of betrayal. Senator Septimus Del Maris looked uneasy. While he agreed that action needed to be taken, he was very concerned at the very open implications and threats to Sateran liberties. He suppressed a sigh. Just by accepting His Highness's invitation to be here, Septimus had already chosen his devil. And what shall we in the Senate do? Zorzal smiled wickedly. For now, we will allow the negotiations to proceed. You need only follow along while voicing your understandable concern for the morale and dignity of the empire and her people. In time, we will sway the rest of the Senate to see reason. In the meantime, I shall gather my own men from the imperial army, so we would have the loyal supporters needed to defend our rights. He then eyed each of them in turn. It is true that for the moment, we stand alone. And as much it pains me to say, my father, His Majesty the Emperor has become tired with the weight of his rule. While I hate to even think it, let alone speak it, the fire and strength have faded from his eyes. His nerve is failing and his mind riddled with doubts. It is only a question of time, whether he can continue in such a broken state or finally collapse. If that happened, the empire is gonna need a new stronger ruler, the one who succeed, where the previous had failed. He then shook his head. And there's my beloved sister, Pina. We all know she has always been impressionable and, gods be praised, she has a soft heart, which is as a woman should be. But that had made her vulnerable to the lies of our enemies. I fear they're using her as their pawn. The barbarians might even try to force her onto our father's throne where they will undoubtedly manipulate her. And last, but not least, my own brother, Diabo. He is a man of clever words, but not of deeds. I hope he will see the reason and stand with us, but I fear I cannot trust him. You senators know that he is marked with ambitions. He has been attempting to get himself named our father's successor. We cannot take a chance he will not act on his ambitions while we are beset by crisis. That being said, of course, this was just a political show, mainly for the politicians in the room. The merchants were already well and truly wed to Zorzel's cause. He knew he could squeeze them hard for money and resources. When caught between the possibility of a rich return and political power or being killed or simply stripped of everything, they would gladly serve his plans. On the other hand, some of the politicians still pretended to have moral scruples that he needed to soothe. Fortunately, he believes that those others he'll contact real soon will offer him the real support he need. Soon, they'll gathered around him to form a coalition that will help him not only to become an emperor, but also to crush the other worlders as well. This coalition will be made from the richest people of the empire, strong-willed senators and military geniuses, and they all be called as sons of Sidera. The empire has never faced a crisis quite like this, continued Zorzel. We will have to resort to methods which may make some uncomfortable. But if we fail, then I think you all can plainly see our beloved empire will be broken and enslaved, our children poisoned against their own heritage by the barbarians. Stand with me, and you will be hailed 1,000 years hence. Fail me, fail the empire, and fall into dust. Vendetta had long wondered how she would feel about meeting her father's family. His acknowledged family, that was. She found that she was curious more than anything else. Certainly, she felt no animosity toward either her father's legal wife or their son. If anything, she wanted to know them. A rather lovely human woman with honey blonde hair and a slightly built boy with auburn hair. Funny that it was nearly the same as her own. The boy's mother seemed to be a little intimidated by the guards and spoke in a soft, tentative voice. How much like my own mother, Vendetta thought. The boy, named Hadrian, stood slightly protective of his mother but at the same time nervous himself. Vendetta looked at the guards in the room and dismissed them. I'm certain you have questions. I'll have some refreshment brought up for us. We have much in common. First, though, please allow me to introduce my mother, Andromeda. Hadrian looked up as a much timider vulpine woman entered the room. He glanced back at his own mother and then to the newcomer. Vendetta nodded. He had seen it too. Apparently, even if it wasn't strictly human, their father had a type. Are you my sister? Asked Hadrian. Vendetta smiled. Her brother was very quick and perceptive. It is true. Your father, Septimus Del Maris, also fathered me as well. The boy's mother, Antonia, began to look nervous. She considered outright denying what this girl was saying, but in her heart, she knew it was the truth. Looking at Andromeda, the similarities were striking in their children. But why had they been summoned here? Were they here to be punished for her husband's choices? Other senators had survived the scandal of having a mixed child. It was rare, or at least she assumed it was, but it had happened. But Septimus had chosen to hide his past. Would his choices now come back to revenge themselves on her and her son? Vendetta raised a hand for Antonia to pause. I have no quarrel with you or my brother. It is clear that you see the truth the same as he does. I only find it tragic that we have not met before. Family should protect family, and I would like us to be family. She looked at her brother and saw that even in his young mind, he was piecing things together. He would make a great senator one day, with the proper patronage. May I call you Hadrian? Yes. What is your name? He asked. It depends, she said mildly. Most people call me Vendetta. These are the people that I have not given permission to use the name my mother gave me. My mother calls me Cassiopeia. I would be happy if you and your mother called me that. She tipped her head slightly to Hadrian's mother. Lady Antonia, brother. Please sit comfortably. We four have much to discuss. It was a bit later that Prince Zorzel informed Senator Maris that his wife and son were expecting him in the parlor. The senator suppressed a sense of dread. Was Zorzel making a threat to assure he stayed in line? As he followed Zorzel's chamberlain to the parlor, he did not expect to see his cast-off lover sitting and making polite conversation with his wife. It had been nearly 20 years, but Andromeda had changed very little, except that some of the shine in her eyes had faded. Husband, Antonia smiled, the look of a cat who had finally caught the resident rat out of bounds. I believe you've met Andromeda. It's simply amazing how much we have in common, including bearing you a child. His lips started to move, but Antonia, driven by a fire which Andromeda could never dare, only glowered. Don't play us for fools. She looked to Andromeda and smiled encouragingly. Andromeda is going to be a wonderful companion, I think. She's such a cultured woman. Thank you, dear. She's the sister I never had, and Hadrian is also quite fond of his new aunt and his sister. Septimus noticed the critical look in his son's eyes even before his brain registered the fourth individual at the table. Hello, father, the young Vulpine woman said with a voice like steel wrapped in silk. You have no idea how long I've waited for this day. Are you planning to hold my family hostage to make sure I behave myself? Hardly, Vendetta said coldly. Your arrangements with the Crown Prince are for you and him to handle. The fact that he finds me interesting merely allows me the privilege of meeting my brother and making certain I'm in a position to take care of my family. And I think Hadrian is going to go very far in this world. Oh, Antonia remembered, her canines showing a bit. You haven't been properly introduced. She glanced to the Vulpine girl with a dangerous twinkle in her eyes. Mother named me Cassiopeia. You can call me Vendetta. Despite prospering, there were still a few persons within the city who saw Italica's alliance with the other worlders as a bad thing. Some were merchants who prospered under the imperial reign over the Situ, while others just did not believe that Mayui was old enough to make such a decision that affected thousands of Italica's citizens. But if there was one person who despised the coalition the most, was none other than Bartholomew. At first glance, one would believe that Bartholomew was your typical kindly old man who had faithfully served the formal household for many years. This was true, as he had become a member of the formal staff when he was just 17 years of age and had worked himself up from being a simple stable boy to eventually made it to head butler of the formal household. An accomplishment that did not go unnoticed by Count Formal, as both him and Bartholomew developed a friendship over the years. But the seemingly kind and humble butler had a side to him that not even Count Formal or Cain herself knew. Like most humans, Bartholomew had his vices, and in his case, it was women. Bartholomew would often make trips to the imperial capital and visit many of the establishments that were known to exist in the less than reputable districts of the city. Establishments that were known to offer high-quality services for the right price for people like the lustful butler, and when he could not go to Sidera, Bartholomew would often pay women to spend the night with him in his home in Italica. Obviously, these services were not cheap even with the money he was getting from his employment, which was really good, by the way, and it was not long before the butler began to gather some serious debt. The kind of debt that you really should pay off before the people you owed money to came after you to collect. Fortunately for him, the head butler had begun to supplement his income by secretly selling information about the formal clan to not only the Empire, but other certain groups who were willing to pay for such information. His acts of treason had managed to pay off his debts to his creditors, but also allowed him to once again indulge in his vices and eventually led him back into debt. It was a vicious cycle, but somehow Bartholomew made it work. But that soon changed after the gate opened and the Empire abandoned the city. Most of his contacts fled the city not too long after the other worlders occupied Italica, thus destroying most of his income. Yet, he still continued with his weekly trysts with women, and as you would expect, his debt climbed and his creditors were starting to ask questions he could not answer. But salvation came when one of his former clients left a message for him at his home, instructing the butler to bring a certain item and that he would be paid very well for his work. Who was he to turn down easy money? Now he was here in one of Italica's less than reputable taverns to meet with his contact. The air was musky and the lighting was not the best, as women of various ages talked up potential clients to spend their time with for the evening. It was a tavern the butler was all too familiar with and had many fond memories as a result, but today he was here for business rather than pleasure. Glad to see you could make it, a female voice suddenly said, and when he looked, Bartholomew soon found himself face to face with one would originally think was a cat girl. But of course, the elderly butler knew better. She wore a brown cloak that covered most of her physical features, save for her cat-like face. Her eyes glowed an eerie green color in the candlelight, which illuminated her feline features on her face. Have you got what my master asked for? Right here, replied Bartholomew, as he handed over a small bag to his new companion. I am certain this is what you wanted. The cat woman smiled wickedly, as she looked in the bag and saw its contents. Without another word, she then took out 3 large sacks of gold coins and placed it on the table before the old man. I am certain this is more than enough to pay for your services. Boros sends his gratitude for your services. Thank you, miss, Bartholomew replied, as he took up the bags of gold and pocketed them in his own robes. But as he looked up to speak with his companion again, the butler realized that he was once again alone at the table. Excuse me, sir, a very curvy fox girl asked, as she walked up to his table, but would you mind buying a young loss like me a drink? Looking at the fox girl, young enough to be his granddaughter, Bartholomew quickly forgot about his meeting with the cat woman and decided to use his newfound wealth on a well-deserved evening with this young fox woman. What? Surprised Centurion, as he was seated with bar waitress Delilah, you've received orders to kill Noriko Mochizuki and Taiul. Yes, Sir Prime, answered Delilah, this day, when I've returned back home, I've found this letter in my room, written by Countess Mayui. She handed the scroll to Centurion, who put the gloves on his hands and took it. He read the scroll and then looked at the Delilah. It's a fake, he said. According to this, Mayui was been ordered by Princess Pina to kill Noriko and Taiul, but we both know that Pina has no authorization in Italica. That's right, said Delilah, my orders can be only come from Madame Mayui, not Princess Pina. We better take this letter to the labs, said Centurion, getting up, I've got a feeling that we're dealing with foul play. Several minutes later, both Centurion and Delilah were at the ANF laboratory, where one of the specialists was been checking letters handwriting by the computer. You were right, General Prime, said the technician, this letter is a fake. The words were been masterly substituted by someone, who was trying to make them look by been written by a little girl. The only thing that is authentical is formal family's seal. What does that means, Sir Prime? Asked Delilah. It means that there's a traitor in Formal's family, answered Centurion. He stolen the family seal, so that the perpetrator would make it look like the genuine order from Formal family. Who might that be? Asked Delilah. We'll find out later, said Centurion. Right now, we've got other things to worry about. Whoever tried to use you to kill Noriko and Taiul would also try to kill them by himself. We must stop him. He then took the letter and handed to another officer. Scan this letter for fingerprints, besides Miss Delilah, he ordered, and have the military police and carabinieri to check on the new guests in Alnistown. I want to know how this letter got into Delilah's room. Yes sir, saluted the officer and leaves, while Centurion went to the table and picked up the phone. He dialed several numbers and waited for a moment. General Hazama, he said, this is Centurion Prime. We got a problem. There's a killer in Alnistown, who's trying to kill Mrs. Noriko Mochizuki and Taiul. Yes, the same ones we've rescued from Zorzel. It looks like he was trying to use Miss Delilah in his scheme. I'll tell you the rest later. Right now, I need you, Colonel Mitchell, Lieutenant Yanagita and Rory Mercury at my office, right away. Thank you, goodbye. Several minutes later, Centurion and Delilah were back into Centurion's office, where Hazama, Scott, Yanagita and Rory were also present. Centurion quickly explained that he had anticipated the killer's move, who might use the warrior bunny's hatred towards Taiul to kill her. That's why he and Rory talked with Delilah and explained to her that Taiul has never been a traitor but rather a pawn been used by Zorzel's goons. And so, as you can see, gentlemen, he continued, the killer was trying to use Delilah as a tool to kill both Noriko and Taiul, but he made two big mistakes. 1. He didn't able to fully forged Mayui's handwriting, and 2. He forgot that since Italica's independence, Princess Pina has no authorization over Formal family. Nevertheless, we believe that the killer will try to strike by himself tonight. This whole thing sounds really familiar, said Rory. I've been hearing rumors about an assassin who worked exactly this way. He calls himself the Piper. The Piper? Asked Hazama. Yes, answered Rory, he always uses those people who's innocent and close to the target so that they could do his dirty work for him. Sounds like a real scum. All right, snorted Scott, how does he looks like? Nobody knows, answered Rory. Sometimes he appeared as an old woman, sometimes a young girl, other times as demi-human like Vulpine or cat. I see, said Centurion, a shapeshifter. And no doubt, he'll try to kill Noriko and Taiul by himself. All right, gentlemen, listen up. Here's what we're gonna do. All the lights in her room had been turned off, but Noriko could not care if they were on or not. The only light source being the LED lamp that was mounted on the wall just outside her hospital window, as well as the dull glow that came from her cell phone. She had been given said phone to call her aunt, who she had been told was just as devastated about the death of her family. But as she sat there in the darkened room, the high schooler didn't know if she could even bring herself to call her distant relative. The teen even wondered if she could even go on knowing that she would never feel the love she once received from her family. The teen was held prisoner for months was R***ped numerous times by that man, while her family had been dead all that time. How could she move on and live a normal life, with all the mental scars she now had? How does one move on after going through what she had and having nothing waiting for her once she returned home? Was life even worth living anymore? Did she really want to live out her days, reliving that hellish time in Zorzel's palace every single day in her mind? So lost she was in her own despair, Noriko didn't notice the door open and a familiar figure enter her room. "Noriko-san," Taeul said softly in broken Japanese, as the former queen walked up to her friend's bedside. The warrior bunny could tell that the younger woman had been crying, but decided to comment on it. Noriko, surprised by Taeul's sudden appearance, looked up at the bunny woman in her eyes before she replied. "Oh, Taeul, didn't see you there." Almost in an instant, the warrior bunny could tell that something was wrong with her younger friend. "Is something wrong, Noriko?" Taeul asked, her voice filled with concern. "It's nothing. I'm fine." The young woman lied, but not enough to convince the former queen. "Noriko, why aren't you more happy? You will be going home soon, you will see your family again." No, I won't." The teen began to cry. "They're dead. They're all dead." "What? They were killed the same day the Empire attacked," Noriko explained through her tears, her eyes now stinging from the salt-laced liquid her body now produced. "I have no one now, I'm all alone." Taeul's heart broke upon hearing about Noriko's parents, and it truly killed her to see her friend in so much pain. In the time she had taken to know this woman from beyond the gate, Taeul knew just how much she loved her family by the way she spoke about them. It was quite possibly the only thing that kept Noriko from falling into madness while being held captive by Zorzel, that one hope she had of seeing her family again. But now it seemed as if those hopes were in vain all this time. Why did life have to be so cruel to Noriko? Didn't she suffer enough? Don't you have any other family waiting for you back home? The former battle queen asked the young woman, her concern now growing for the teen's mental state. She had seen this before on many slaves that had been brought into Zorzel's home in the past, and it never ended well. I have an aunt, my mother's sister," Noriko muttered out sadly, but I hardly knew her growing up and she is not your mother?" Taeul asked the teen girl before her, causing Noriko to watch her. "I know you can never have your family back, but you cannot give up now. Especially after what you have been through." "But I don't know if I can move on," Noriko sobbed softly. "Not after what that man." "Yes you can," Taeul reassured her friend, as she rested her weathered hand on Noriko's lap. "You are much stronger than you think, and I know you will be able to live a happy life in the future. If your aunt is anything like your mother, then I am certain that you will overcome this with her help." "But what if I can't?" the young woman asked frightfully, as she gazed into the warrior's eyes. Her young face filled with fear and uncertainty of just what the future would hold for her now. "You will be all right," Taeul calmly told her friend. "And I will make sure that you will be." "What do you mean?" A sad expression flashed upon Taeul's face, before she sighed heavily and said, "Once this war is over and Zorzel is punished, I will be moving across the gate too." "What?" Noriko gasped at her friend's words, surprised that Taeul would want to make such a big move for herself. "Why?" "Because even after I kill Zorzel for what he did, I still would have no reason to stay in Falmart," the warrior bunny explained, a sad expression showing on her face as she spoke. "He took advantage of me and I was too trusting of him. Because of me, the northern tribes were destroyed and my people blame me for it. Even if I were to kill Zorzel, there is no way I could see my people in their eyes because of the shame for what I caused." "But, can't you tell them Zorzel lied to you?" Noriko asked. "You said he promised to leave your people alone if you became his slave, wouldn't they believe you?" Taeul just shook her head sadly before she replied. "Zorzel and the Empire made me look like a traitor to my people, and they were right. I betrayed their trust and confidence in me when I foolishly went to Zorzal to surrender myself, thinking he would have a battle queen rather than an entire race. I was, just so stupid. Tears began to form in her eyes. There is no future for me here, even if I kill that bastard. There is nothing for me here in this world, but, Noriko, you were my first friend in many years and I don't want to lose you too. I know I could never replace your family but, maybe we can be each other's. A small smile formed on Noriko's face, as she embraced her demihuman friend. Yes, Taiul, we will. Well, that's really nice from you to hear, heard another voice, because soon you'll be in Hardy's realm. Both Noriko and Taiul gasped, as they saw a newcomer, a strange creature, that looked like a mix between cat and vulpine. Nora, growled Taiul, getting up and standing before Noriko, what are you doing here? Boro has not been in a good mood since you decided to run off with these other-worlders, the shapeshifter replied. You were supposed to manipulate Zorzal into getting one of Boro's clan members pregnant and produce an heir with Hario blood. But here you are helping these invaders into our realm, and as a result, you must die. I would never help Hario, Taiul spat back. They're no better than that bastard Zorzal. Don't you dare compare us to that filth, roared Nora, raising her knife. Alright, you bitch, suddenly boomed another voice, drop the knife or we'll make Swiss cheese out of you. Nora gasped and turned to see Centurion, Yanagita, Scott and several of his ghosts, all armed with handguns and rifles, aiming at her. Aside from them, stood Rory with her halberd and Delilah, armed with a knife. Damn it, cursed Nora, it seems that my trick has backfired on me. Next time you wanna kill someone, shot back Delilah, make sure that my orders comes from Madame Mayui, not Princess Pina. You'll all die, screamed Nora and rushed at her foes, but the next moment, Centurion and others fired their guns, literally shredding her apart. Then both Rory and Delilah attacked with lightning speed and finished off the Piper. Taiul was busy hugging Noriko, who was once again scared for her life. Then Yanagita came to them and took them in his arms. Alright, said Centurion, now with the shapeshifter is out of the way, perhaps you can explain what's going on, Miss Taiul. If the apostle already told you about Nora, then I guess you are well aware about the Hario clan. Taiul told Centurion, Scott and Hazama, cause if she did, then you are well aware of just how devious and dangerous they could be. Miss Mercury informed us about the clan. Hazama confirmed. Why would they want you dead? Because, Taiul began. Because, they tried to use me to destroy the Empire. What? The Hario does not want to destroy the Empire, but control it. The former queen began to explain. They genuinely believe that are the rightful rulers of Flamart and that it is their destiny to take control of the continent, and that they should rule over every other species that call it home. But what does that have to do with you? Scott asked her, puzzled by this group's logic. They believe that the only way they could take over the Empire is if they were to have one of their own born into the royal family. Taiul replied. One of their spies came to me one night and asked if I could get Zorzal to mate with one of their own. They wanted the crown prince to get one of their women pregnant and bear an legitimate heir to the Sateran throne. The Hario believed that with one of their own on the throne, they could take control of the Empire and by extension, Falmart. That's a stupid plan. Rory snorted out. There is no way that fool Zorzal would select an heir that was not born to one of his slaves. He would not have to. Taiul began to explain. The Hario know that their plan would not work, unless all the other members of the imperial family were dead, leaving Zorzal illegitimate child as the sole heir to the Sidera throne. With one of their own as emperor, the Hario believed that they would control the empire. But I promise you, they would be no better. But you were working with them, Scott asked the warrior bunny, choosing his words wisely before he spoke. Taiul just shrugged before she replied. I did, in the beginning, before I knew just how devious they truly were. We both hate the Empire, but where I want to watch Sidera burn to keep my people safe, the Hario and its leader want to control it and subjugate everyone it rules. Including my people. I'm guessing that you're no longer being that close to Zorzal has not gone over well with their leadership, the Japanese general commented. They were most likely the ones who sent that fake message to Delilah to kill you. Believe me, Delilah would have killed me even if the Hario had not tricked her into doing it. Taiul said sadly, to my people, I am a traitor. I was the one who sold them out to the Empire. Somehow I am surprised that Delilah has come to save me. I actually had the misfortune to encounter the Hario many years ago. Rory suddenly spoke up. There are special places in Hardy's realm for them when they die, places where Nora now resides. They probably sent her to kill Delilah after she had killed Tyrell. That sounds logical, said Centurion, but right now, we've got other things to worry about. If this Hario tribe tried to kill Tyrell once, they'll surely try to do it again. Considering that what we've learned about them in the past few days, they're quite dangerous clan of shapeshifters. I'd say, we deal with this problem with extreme measures. In order to stabilize the situation in Falmart and destroy Zorzel's net of spies and assassins, the Hario clan must be destroyed with extreme prejudice. Agree, said Scott, we cannot allow this group to operate in province. Considering that they've already have infiltrated the Alnistown and manipulate one of our guests to commit attempted murder, I'd say we need to permanently remove Hario clan out of the equation. Then it's decided, said Hazama, I shall have our air force ready to bomb the possible Hario base of operations. Once our scouts locate it, we bomb it to bits. I think we shall let Rory handle the search mission, said Centurion. With added help from Ghost Team, she'll be able to locate Hario's hideout in no time. Rory smiled. I'll be happy to it, she said. Good, said Hazama. Now, about Prince Zorzel. We need to increase our watch on this guy by day and night, so that we learn more about his plans. Perhaps I have a suggestion, said Centurion. During the party at the Jade Palace, I've noticed that Zorzel have a taste for fine food. He was particularly got favorite of one of our soldiers, Faruda, who was working there as one of the cooks. So, chuckled Scott, the best way to this guy's plans is through his stomach. I'd say, we should use that opportunity to get Faruda closer to Zorzel. If I may remind you, gentlemen, said Hazama, Faruda is more of a soldier, not a spy. Except that we're already have one of our best spies looking after Zorzel, said Centurion. I'll send a message to Sam Fisher, so that he'll back up Faruda and cover him, just in case. Agree, said Scott. Sam is a perfect field operative. He can help Faruda to gather the information we need and help him to get extracted, when his mission will be over. Then it's decided, said Centurion. General Hazama, I want you to send new order to Director Nyutabaru in Akusho about Faruda's new job. Understood, sir, saluted the Japanese general. Now, one last thing, the traitor in Formal House. Leave that to me, answered Centurion. I'll personally go to Italica and find out who's the rat that betrayed Formal family. I'll also take Delilah with me. I think she'll be more than happy to get even with the scum who tried to use her loyalty to Formal family against her masters. At the Sedera, Kurata visited one of the markets. Yes, this alcohol called brandy is a good stuff, said one of the merchants. The nobles are buying it, like hot cakes. Say, if you're trying to make a real killing on your selling, said Kurata, why not try to the imperial family? You mean, Prince Zorzel, mused the merchant, that would be difficult. The government purveyor will certainly put a stop to that. It figures, snorted Kurata, they allow you to sell real goods, but not where it can make the real fortune from it. Hey, hold on, said the merchant, perhaps there is a way we can get this business to His Highness. Yeah, surprised Kurata. Yeah, said the merchant, I've been hearing that he's been lately going through several noble houses, attending their banquets. So, I suppose, there's gonna be a special order on other world goods, asked Kurata. You bet, said the merchant, in fact, there's one gonna be thrown tonight. Say, can you do me a favor? Asked Kurata. One of my friends is a cook, who's just happened to be a specialist in cooking real fine meals. A cook? Yeah. You see, in order to make the finest food, you need the finest cook, and my friend is a real whiz when it comes to cooking. I see, said the merchant, if I get your friend inside, he make a fine dinner for Prince Zorzel, which will increase my own profits. Alright, I'll pull some strings and help your friend to get to that party. What's his name, anyway? It's Faruda. What? Gasped Kane. Delilah was been ordered to kill Noriko and Tyrell. Yes, Miss Kane, answered Centurion. It seemed that the killer was trying to use her loyalty to House Formal and her hatred towards Tyrell to attempt a murder. Fortunately for us, I've foreseen this scenario, so I was able to clear Tyul's name to Delilah and other warrior bunnies, and thanks to her, we've been able to stop the killer. That's a relief, sighed Cain, but who could have done that? We believe that this was done with the help from a traitor in House Formal, answered Centurion. The killer used the authentical seal of Formal family to sign the letter. A traitor, you say? Growled Cain. I think I know whose we're dealing with. Several minutes later, Bartholomew was been taken into the Formal house's basement, where the maids were slapping him silly. We know that you've sold the seal on the black market, said Cain, and we know about your debts you've been into. That's not true, protested the butler, I don't know anything about it. Oh really, said the Japanese officer and walked to him, holding the letter. Take a closer look, he said, we've discovered several fingerprints on the letter. One of them belongs to Delilah, the other to Nora, better known as the Piper, and the last one, wanna take a guess? The butler shivered, realizing that these other worlders have him cornered. I think it's best for you to tell us everything we want to know, Mr. Bartholomew, said Centurion, coming to Butler, otherwise, we'll be forced to use some unusual methods to make you speak. I'm innocent, I'm telling you, yelled Bartholomew. That's what I find hard to believe, snorted Centurion, then he stick 2 fingers into Butler's mouth. I've just struck specifical PowerPoint in your body, Mr. Bartholomew, said Centurion, now your mouth is gonna tell us everything we wanna know, no matter how hard you try to resist it. You can't, started the butler, but then find out that his own mouth is working against his own will. Now then, said Centurion, let's talk. Why did you stole the seal? So, said Cain, he's been bribed to steal the seal, because they've promised him a lot of money. Yeah, that's the case, answered Centurion, we've already asked the owner of the tavern, and he recognized Bartholomew's client, it was Nora the Piper. I see, said Cain, they've used the famous Piper to make Delilah kill Noriko and Tyul. Well, it's a good thing that their plan has failed. But what about the Hario? I've already sended Rory Mercury and the Ghost Team, Hunter, to locate and destroy Hario's base, answered Centurion, we'll make sure that they won't appear on Alnus or in Italica again, as well deprive Prince Zorzel of his spies and killers. I'm sure, Her Holiness will do the job you've ordered her, Sir Prime, said Cain, and what about Bartholomew? He's committed the crime against the Formal family, asked Centurion, I think, you should deal with him, Miss Cain. Leave that to me, Sir Prime, said the headmaid, I'll make sure that bastard paid dearly for his betrayal of Madame Mayui and my children. Nobody messes with our family and gets away with it. Oh, and by the way, said Centurion, I've decided to have Delilah stay here for a while. I'm sure she has some personal scores to settle with Bartholomew. Oh, I think she will, smiled Cain grimly. That night, at one of the finest homes in Sidera, Faruda was busy doing the cooking, when suddenly. Hey, shouted Zorzel, suddenly appearing in the kitchen, I want to know, who cooked this manuga meat? Said Faruda, that would be me, your highness. You, exclaimed the prince, rushing to him, where have you been? I've been searching through the whole Sidera to find you. You're practically the god of cooking. Please, sire, you flatter me, smiled Faruda. Well, I may have some important assignment for you, said Zorzel, come down to the imperial palace tomorrow morning. From now on, you'll be cooking directly for the crown prince of Empire Zorzel El Caesar. I'll be honored, sire, bowed Faruda, as prince left the kitchen, following by Cassiopeia. And whose that will be? Asked Faruda. Don't know, answered one of the maids, but it looks like she's with the prince, wherever he goes lately. Looks like she's his new girlfriend. I see, said Faruda, this will make my job a whole lot complicated, he thought. The ominous sounds of the other worlders' fantastic machines filled the cold night air, as a lone figure as fast as he could through the forest. Despite his old age, the former head butler of the Formal household had somehow managed just barely make it out of Italica, before the gates were closed. In front of him was an uncertain future that would most likely be filled with strife and hardship. In his old age, Bartholomew should not have had to worry about such unpleasant thoughts. But actions have consequences, and if the other worlders caught him, he would be forced to face them, and considering what he had done, it was unlikely the old man would die of old age. Those blasted other worlders. Curse them all. If it wasn't for them, his final years would have most likely been filled with fine wines and beautiful women. Or at least that was what the butler-turned-fugitive thought, as he navigated through the darkness. Bartholomew may have now faced an uncertain future because of his actions, but it was still better than a guaranteed death that would be his reward if he were to be recaptured. It was just a miracle that he was able to convince that brat Mayui to let him go, and she allowed him to leave the mansion. But the former butler knew that this act of mercy was only to allow him to leave the formal house, so that his blood would not stain in its walls. In assisting the Hario in their attempt to kill Tayul, Bartholomew had more or less signed his own death warrant. The old man had gotten sloppy. The other worlders were able to link the butler to the assassination attempt with the help of Cain and her maids. Knowing that time was now running out, Bartholomew made way out of Italica before any alarm was raised. But that was only the easy part. Bartholomew needed to get as far away as possible from both his former employers and the wrath of the other worlders. But it was Cain and her maids that really frightened the old man, as he knew better than anyone that the late Count's maids were in fact bodyguards for not only himself but his family as well. A family Bartholomew had attempted to place in danger by linking them to an assassination attempt on one of their allies as citizens, which made them really angry. Bartholomew did not know if said attempt had been successful or not, but that was the least of his worries at the moment, as he could hear one of the other worlders' flying machines approach his location. He knew if he had stayed with that merchant convoy, the other worlders would have found him with ease. Which was why Bartholomew had fled into the forest as soon as he had the opportunity. Reaching into his pocket, the old man took out a small pouch and proceeded to down its contents into his mouth. It was a special mixture of herbs and other organic materials which he had used for the last few years. Normally, the lustful butler would use said mixture to give him the energy he needed to enjoy himself with the many women he had hired in the past. Now he was using it to give him the energy he needed to flee Italica once and for all. But Bartholomew was not completely unprepared for his sudden departure from the city-state, as he had created a safe house for himself over the years that not even his late friend and former count knew about. This particular house was nothing more than a crude home built in a cave where Bartholomew would sometimes use when he hired companionship for himself. But the butler also kept a change of clothes and even a couple pouches of gold just in case he needed to flee from Italica. Which he was doing right now. It was not much, but it was enough for him to at least pay for passage to any city in Falmart and even rent a space for himself. If he could just get to his safe house, then he could lay low for a few days before moving on to his next destination. Maybe Elbe or even one of the Empire's coastal colonies. As he continued to stumble through the darkness, Bartholomew could hear the sounds of the other worlders get softer and softer. They were moving away from him, probably to search somewhere else. A joyous feeling soon fell upon the elderly butler-turned-fugitive. He was going to get away after all. But no sooner had those thoughts flashed across his mind, a small dagger flew out from the darkness and struck the old man in his left shoulder from behind. Bartholomew cried out in pain, as the sharp blade embedded itself into his flesh and soaked his already dirty shirt in his own blood. Yet, the former butler bit through the pain and continued to press on into the darkness. He could not afford to stop now, he was so close. But no sooner had the first dagger struck, another one flew out and this time, embedded itself in Bartholomew's lower back. The impact alone sending the old man tumbling in down a nearby river bed. Now covered in blood, dirt and mud, Bartholomew tried to get up and flee his would-be attackers. But for some reason, his legs refused to move him. As a matter of fact, the former butler soon realized that he could not feel his legs at all. A sense of dread soon came over the old man, as he desperately tried to drag himself towards the tree line to hide. His dreams of escaping quickly evaporating with every second. The forest was not quite, too quiet for the old man's liking. He was so close, so close. "Show yourselves," the wounded man cried out into the darkness, both pain and fear evident in his voice as he spoke. "I want to see the faces of my killers." Sadly, this one final request would never be granted, as the former butler suddenly felt a sharp blade pressed against his neck. "Remember me, you old bastard," heard a familiar voice. Bartholomew looked and saw familiar rabbit ears and green eyes. "Delilah," gasped the butler, realizing that as fate would have it, he would be get killed by the one who he tried to use in his killing attempt. This one's for using my hatred towards Taiul and trying to kill Noriko Mochizuki, spat Delilah. Madame Mayui sends her best regards. She then swinged her blade, and in one swift move, Bartholomew was no more. His lifeless body slumping on itself, as blood oozed out of his neck and covered him in red. Bartholomew had crossed the line when he attempted to frame the formal clan for a crime that could have resulted in her losing the only home she had ever known. Thanks to him, she almost became a murderer, all because of his disgusting hobbies involving women. Only by the grace of Polypon did the other worlders did not go into a blind fury because of Bartholomew's actions. Madame Kane was not the type to order such a mission to any one of her maids, but Bartholomew had tricked one of her girls in an attempt to stir up trouble with the other worlders. Her girls. To Kane, the young women under her charge were not just maids, but her family. Her daughters, even if they were not human like herself, and no one messed with her family. Bartholomew was a threat. He needed to pay for his actions, and pay he did in full. There's special places in Hardy's realm for people like the late butler Trader, a place Delilah was more than happy to send him to. Washing off her blade in the river water, the former warrior bunny now waitress took one final look at Bartholomew's body resting against the boulder. She didn't smile, nor did she scowl at the sight before her. She just shook her head before making her way back into the forest and back towards Italica and then to Alnus, leaving Bartholomew's body to rot in the wilderness for his crimes. Black Sheep is above target, the F-18 pilot said into his flight mask, as he watched the information that was being displayed on the aircraft's HUD system. The F-18 was just one of 6 which had been deployed by the coalition for this mission, all of whom now orbited high above their intended target and were armed with a mix of AMG-154C, glide bombs, and JADMs for this particular mission. Rory and the Ghosts had succeeded in locating the Hario hideout in Cerberus Tavern near Duma Mountains. According to the information the Ghosts have transmitted, the entire leadership of the clan, including Boro, were due to have a meeting the days to come. With such an opportunity presenting itself to the Coalition Command, a contingent of Delta Force and Japanese SFG were deployed via Osprey to the Duma Mountains to confirm the location. Curiously, Rory herself had also joined the Joint Task Force at her request, as she too had an invested interest in ensuring the destruction of the Hario clan. In her mind, the Hario were not worthy enough to stand alongside Emroy in the afterlife. With Rory's help, the coalition troops were able to confirm the identities of several high-ranking clan leaders and their overall leader Boro. With the Hario base location confirmed and with the clan leadership all in one place, there was only one thing left to do. Black Sheep Flight, you are cleared to engage the target, a voice replied over the radio, as the Hornet's pilot saw his target being painted by laser. With one last word of confirmation, Black Sheep Lead guided his aircraft into formation with the rest of his squadron. The first 3 aircraft came in at an angle and dropped their combined payload of a 6 Joint Direct Attack Munitions JDAMs at the tavern. The 1000 lb munitions striking was true, as massive explosions erupted within the now crumbling stone walls and pretty much killing everyone inside, but the coalition wanted to make sure that the Hario were completely taken out of the picture. No sooner had the first 3 aircraft made attack, the second wave came in and dropped their glide bombs to ensure that the destruction was absolute. That no one would be getting out of the rubble alive. Once again, the guided bombs found their target, this time causing the mountain come down and bury the fortress once and for all. And with it, the Hario threat to the special region was gone forever. Come the morning, the joint US-Japanese unit have surveyed the destruction and confirmed that no one had survived the Hornets' attack. A fact that made the Apostle of Emroy smile wickedly, as she saw the smoldering rock slide before her. Within a few hours, the Delta Force and SFG were returned to Fort Ginza, leaving behind the tomb they had created for what had been the Hario clan. Unknown to them, several figures in Sedera, including a certain Vulpine, would not be happy about this. But as they say in France, "À la guerre comme à la guerre, on war's on war." Thus the Hario clan was now busy in Hardy's realm, paying the piper. This is the end of part 16 of this What If. I hope you guys like it. Leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel to see more amazing contents.